The mothership rests anchor in a calm, open bay on the southern side of one of the Galapagos Islands, a place where the seafloor shelves gradually and the holding ground is good. The ship is a whale ship, a three-masted vessel of a kind that has been away from its home port for nearly 3 years. Her hull heavy with oil from previous hunts, her decks worn smooth by the tread of many bare feet. From a distance, seen across the water from where the small boat will soon be, she appears as a dark, quiet shape with her sails furled and her yards squared, rocking so gently on the long Pacific swell that the movement is almost imperceptible. The morning is far advanced, but the sun remains hidden behind a high, thin layer of cloud that spreads from horizon to horizon, filtering the light into a soft, even glow without sharp shadows. In that light, the volcanic shapes of the islands rise in the distance, their outlines softened by haze, their slopes a muted brown and olive green, the highest points disappearing into the pale sky. Everything is still. On board the ship there is no hurry. The lookout at the masthead, a man who has been aloft since first light, has called down in a low voice that a sperm whale is spouting perhaps 2 miles off the starboard bow, and the captain has given the quiet order to lower a boat. The men move across the deck with the ease of long practice, barefoot on the warm planks, speaking in murmurs if they speak at all. The whaleboat hangs from its davits, a double-ended boat of 28 feet, painted a faded grey-green, its thwarts worn, its tubs of line already coiled and ready. The gear has been checked many times, the harpoons with their sharp dark iron, the lances wrapped in canvas, the hatchets, the waifs, the small wooden keg of drinking water. You, the steerer, have already taken your place in the bow while the boat is still hanging above the water, stepping down with one hand on the gunwale and the other on the boat's stem, finding your footing without thought. You stand at the very front where the planks come together, your back to the oarsmen who are climbing down one by one, and you face outward toward the sea and the distant whale. The boat is lowered by the falls, the ropes running through the blocks with a sound that is part creak and part hiss, a sound that belongs to the ship and to the work. The men at the tackles pay out the lines steadily, and the boat descends, her keel touching the surface of the water with a soft, spreading hush. The sea receives the boat without resistance, and immediately the hull begins to move with the swell, a slow rise and fall that is longer and gentler than the rocking of the ship. You feel this new movement through the soles of your feet, a subtle shift in the angle of the planks, a faint tilting that travels from the stern to the bow and back again. It is a different rhythm from the ship's, deeper and more patient, as if the boat has become a part of the ocean itself. The falls are cast off, the boat is free, and the oarsmen ship their oars, fitting the looms into the hole pins with small, precise movements that make hardly any noise at all. The officer in the stern, the mate, speaks in a voice that is not much more than a low tone, telling the men to give way, and the oars dip into the water. The blades, long and narrow, enter without a splash, just a clean parting of the surface, and the boat begins to move away from the mothership. There is no sense of speed, only a gradual separation, the dark flank of the vessel sliding slowly astern. You watch the ship's side as it recedes, the waterline marked with green weed, the copper sheathing dull below the surface, the name on the stern unreadable from this angle, but known to you anyway. The ship becomes smaller, a familiar shape diminishing, and then you turn your head slightly to face forward, toward the open sea. The water is a deep, soft blue-grey, a colour that seems to have no bottom and no edge, merging with the sky at a horizon that is barely distinguishable. The swell is long and rolling, coming from the southwest, and the boat rises on each crest so slowly that the movement is like breathing, a full breath in and a full breath out, spread over half a minute or more. When you are in the trough, the world becomes a small circle of water around you, the ship disappearing behind the nearest swell, the islands reduced to faint dark tops in the distance. Then you lift again, and the view opens, the horizon widening, the ship reappearing, the whale's spout visible as a thin white smudge against the grey sky. The air is warm but without weight, a temperature that you notice only because it sits on your skin without making you either shiver or sweat. It is a climate of suspension, a place where the body feels neither hot nor cold, just present. Your position in the bow is one of stillness. You stand with one foot slightly ahead of the other, your left hand resting lightly on the gunwale, the wood smooth and cool under your palm. Your right hand holds the harpoon, not raised but resting upright in its crotch, the iron point a few inches above your head, the long wooden handle fitting into the socket of the boat's stem. The harpoon is heavy, but its weight is familiar, a part of your arm, and you do not think about holding it any more than you think about holding your own shoulder. The line is coiled in the tub just behind you, a careful arrangement of rope that has been flaked down so that it will run free without tangling, each loop lying against the next in a pattern that has been made and remade 1,000 times. You can hear the line shifting faintly as the boat rocks, a whisper of hemp on hemp, a sound so quiet it might be your own breathing. The oarsmen pull with a cadence that is slower than a walk, a rhythm set by the mate's low words, and you do not look back at them. You know them by the sound they make, the creak of the thole pins, the soft grunt of an exhale, the splash of the blades as they enter and leave the water. There are 5 oarsmen, 3 on the starboard side and 2 on the port, and they pull in a pattern that is not hurried, each stroke a long glide. Between strokes, during the recovery, the boat coasts, losing momentum so gradually that you cannot tell when one stroke ends and the next begins. The silence inside the boat is complete, except for these small sounds, and they seem to melt into the larger silence of the empty ocean around you. No one speaks beyond what is necessary, and often for minutes at a time, there is no speech at all, only the rhythm of the oars and the hiss of the water along the hull. The sea around the boat is not empty in a lonely way, but in a calm, open way. There are no other ships, no birds calling, no wind to ripple the surface, only the long, even swells that travel across the Pacific from somewhere far to the south. Occasionally, a small patch of ripples forms where a puff of wind touches down, a darkening of the water that lasts a few seconds, then fades, leaving the surface glassy again. The only living thing visible beside yourselves is the distant sperm whale, whose spout you can now see more clearly. A short, bushy column of white mist that hangs for a moment, angled forward and to the left, before dissolving. The whale is a dark shape on the water, too far to make out any detail, but its presence is a calm one, a part of the same slow rhythm that moves the boat. Your attention stays on that distant shape, but without urgency. You are not chasing the whale, you are approaching it, and the difference is in the speed. A chase would involve shouting and fast rowing and a sense of hurry, but this is not that. This is a slow closing of distance, a gradual narrowing of the gap, achieved not by speed, but by patience. The mate in the stern holds the steering oar with a light touch, making tiny corrections, keeping the boat's heading so that you will intercept the whale's path without alarming it. You know this because you have done it many times, and you do not need to look back to know where the mate's hand is. You just feel the boat's direction as a slight pressure on your feet, a sense of alignment that is as natural as balance. The world narrows to the small wooden boat, the breathing of the oarsman behind you, and the absence of sound beyond the splash of blades. The ship is now a distant object, its masts thin against the pale sky, its hull a dark bar on the horizon. The islands are even farther, their volcanic slopes merging with the haze, their details lost to distance. You are alone on the water in the way that a boat is alone, a small self-contained world moving across a larger one. The planks under your feet are warm from the sun, even through the overcast, and you can feel the faint grain of the wood, the slight give of the timber as the boat flexes with the swells. The gunwale is worn where your hand rests, smoothed by years of other hands, and the harpoon's handle is similarly polished, the wood dark with oil and use. Time passes in a way that is measured only by the whale's spout. You watch it rise, a brief puff of white against the grey, then fade, then rise again after a long interval. Between spouts, you study the water, the way the light shifts on the swells, the faint lines of foam that mark where a current runs. The foam lines are thin and irregular, streaks of white that appear and disappear, sometimes carrying a small piece of driftwood or a floating leaf. The ocean is never completely empty, but its contents are so sparse that they only emphasize the emptiness. A single frigate bird, far off, hangs motionless on the air, a dark cross against the cloud layer, and then it tilts and slides away, vanishing into the distance. You watch it go, then return your gaze to the whale. The boat moves forward with the same steady pace, and you feel your body adjusting to the rhythm without thought. Your knees are soft, absorbing the boat's rise and fall, and your shoulders are relaxed. Your grip on the harpoon just firm enough to keep it steady. Your breathing has slowed to match the swell, a pattern that is not conscious but learned over months at sea. You do not think about the whale in terms of what it is worth or what it will yield. You think about it only as a presence ahead, a shape that you are slowly approaching, a quiet companion on the water. The whale dives, its flukes lifting briefly, broad and triangular, and then it is gone below, leaving a smooth circle of calm water. The mate speaks a single word, and the oarsmen stop rowing. The boat drifts. In the silence that follows, you can hear everything more clearly. The low rush of water along the planks, the creak of the mast in the ship far behind you, the distant sigh of the whale's spout when it surfaces again, several hundred yards away. The whale has sounded, diving deep to feed or simply to rest, and you wait. The boat drifts on the swell, rising and falling, and you remain standing in the bow, your hand on the harpoon, your eyes on the sea. The sun's angle has changed slightly, the cloud layer brightening a little, but there is still no direct sunlight, only the same soft, diffuse illumination. The every smells of salt and a faint iodine tang, the clean smell of the open ocean, and underneath that, when the breeze shifts, a hint of something else, the warm, oily odor of the whale's breath carried from its distant spout. After a time, the whale surfaces again, this time closer, its spout a more defined plume, its back a long, dark ridge that rolls slowly through the water. The mate gives the word, and the oars dip again, the rhythm resuming as if it had never stopped. The boat glides forward, and you feel the slight increase in tension that comes with closing distance, a subtle awareness in your hands and your feet. But it is not excitement, it is simply attention, the same quiet attention you would give to any careful task. The harpoon remains in its crotch, the line remains coiled, and you remain still, a part of the boat's own stillness. The islands are now just a faint line on the horizon, the highest peak a soft blue-grey shape that might be a cloud. The ship is smaller still, her masts barely visible, and you know that someone on board is watching through a glass. But you do not think about that either. Your world is the 13 feet of boat from the bow to the first thwart, the feel of the harpoon's weight, the rhythm of the oars, the slow approach of the whale. The sea continues its long, even breathing, and you continue yours, suspended in the warm, hazy morning, waiting with no need for anything to happen quickly or to happen at all. The boat and the whale and the ocean exist together in a kind of shared patience, a long, slow, quiet story that unrolls at the pace of the sea itself. You stand in the bow of the whaleboat, and the place where you stand has been shaped for this purpose over many years of use, though it never feels shaped so much as simply worn, like a step in an old staircase. The bow is the narrowest part of the boat, where the two sides come together to form the stem, a curved piece of oak that rises from the keel and leans slightly forward. The planks meet it on either side, their ends tapered and fitted, and where they join, there is a small triangular platform, just wide enough for your 2 feet. It is not a deck, but a thwart, a seat of sorts that has been reinforced with an extra layer of wood, and it is here that you place yourself, 1 foot ahead of the other, your weight balanced between the ball of your front foot and the heel of your back. The position is so familiar that you could find it in total darkness, guided only by the feel of the grain under your bare soles. The boat itself is a double-ended lapstrake whaleboat, a design that has not changed much in 100 years because it does not need to change. It is long and narrow, 28 feet from the tip of the stem to the tip of the stern post, with a beam of just over 6 feet at the widest point. The sides are built of thin cedar planks, each overlapping the one below it, like the scales of a fish, fastened with copper rivets that have gone green with age. The inside is painted a muted grey, the outside a grey-green that fades into the water when seen from a distance, and the whole structure is light enough to be lifted by the crew, yet strong enough to ride out a heavy sea. But today there is no heavy sea. Only the long, even swells that pass under the hull with a rhythm so slow it is like a memory of motion more than motion itself. Your left hand rests on the gunwale, the upper edge of the boat's side, which at the bow is only a few inches wide. The wood there is satin smooth from the grip of many hands before yours, the varnish, long gone, the cedar beneath polished to a pale honey color. You do not clutch it. Your fingers curl over it with the same gentle pressure you might use to hold a doorknob. enough to feel the boat's movement travel up through your wrist and into your arm. That movement is a combination of pitch and roll, the bow rising and falling as the swell passes underneath, nosing up into the grey sky and then dipping down into the grey water, and a slight side-to-side tilting as the boat rocks. It is not a motion that disturbs balance, but one that supports it, a constant slow adjustment that your knees and ankles make without any thought, your body swaying just enough to keep your head level. Your right hand holds the harpoon, though hold is perhaps too strong a word. The harpoon rests upright in a wooden crotch set into the bow, a simple fork of oak lined with leather, and your hand is around the shaft just below the iron. Your thumb hooks loosely, your fingers relaxed. The shaft is made of hickory, long and straight, its surface darkened by linseed oil and the salt of your palm. It is heavy but not unwieldy, the weight distributed along its length, and standing there with it feels less like holding a tool and more like having an extra bone in your arm, something that extends your reach without requiring effort. The iron at the top is a dark rust-flecked shape, a broad leaf of metal with a sharpened edge and a barb on one side, and it points slightly outward over the water, catching the soft light of the overcast sky on its dull surface. The harpoon is not cocked or poised, it is simply there. You do not think about what it will do, because there is nothing to do yet. The whale is still distant, a dark shape that rises and spouts and sinks again, and you are still waiting, and the harpoon is still a part of the boat's furniture, as motionless as the stem itself. The line that is attached to it leads aft, down through a notch in the bow, around a short wooden loggerhead, and then into the line tub that sits just behind you on the boat's bottom. The tub is a wide, shallow cask, its staves held together by iron hoops, and inside it the whale line is coiled in precise, flat layers. The line is made of the best hemp, 200 fathoms of it, each strand twisted and tarred until it is as dark as wet earth and as supple as a leather belt. It lies there quietly, the top coil glistening faintly in the shade of the tub, and it will stay that way until it is needed, which may be soon, or may be much later, or may be never. Behind you the rest of the boat stretches away toward the stern, a narrow aisle of planking interrupted by the thwarts where the oarsmen sit. You do not see them, but you know their positions as well as you know your own. The harpooner's thwart just behind you, where the second man sits ready with the lance, then the three oarsmen's thwarts spaced evenly along the length, and finally the stern sheets where the officer stands or sits, his hand on the long steering oar. The boat is so narrow that you could almost touch both gunwales at once if you stretched out your arms. But you do not stretch, you stay compact, contained within your own small space at the very front. The sides rise to about thigh height where you stand, high enough to brace against if the boat should lurch, but it does not lurch. It only rocks, slow and regular, the same motion over and over. The feeling of standing in the bow for hours is something that becomes a part of you, a kind of quiet alertness that is not quite waking and not quite dreaming. Your eyes are open and your senses are receiving everything around you, the color of the water shifting from slate to silver as a cloud thins overhead, the faint creak of the thole pins as the oarsmen adjust their grip, the distant wash of a swell breaking against a submerged rock somewhere off to port. But none of these things demand a response. They are simply there, and you are there, and the boat is there, and the morning continues. Your breathing slows to match the boat's rhythm. A long inhale as the bow lifts, a long exhale as it settles, and in between there are pauses that last several heartbeats, moments when the sea seems to stop moving altogether. The harpoon's shaft transmits small vibrations to your hand, the hum of the boat's passage through the water, the tremor of a distant sound, the subtle twang of the hemp line stretching and contracting with the humidity. You can feel the texture of the wood through your palm, the slight ridges of the grain, the tiny crack near the base where the hickory dried out once under a tropical sun and was repaired with the wrapping of marline. That wrapping is tight and neat, a series of half-hitches that have been varnished into a hard amber-colored band, and your thumb sometimes traces it absently while you wait. It is a small thing to notice, but in the long hours of an approach, small things become large, filling the time with their quiet presence. The air inside the boat is still, protected by the gunwales from what little breeze moves across the open sea. You smell the familiar scents of the whaleboat, the cedar of the planks, the tar of the line, the faint rancidity of old oil that has soaked into the wood over many seasons. It is not an unpleasant smell, just a working smell, the smell of a tool that has been used. Under it is the clean salt scent of the ocean, and occasionally, when the wind shifts, the warm animal smell of the sperm whale ahead, a smell that is like nothing else, oily and faintly sweet, like a candle that has just been blown out. It comes to you in thin wafts, barely noticeable, and then it is gone, replaced by the salt again. Your body in the bow is a part of the boat's balance. The boat was designed to carry a man standing right at the front, and without you there, it would ride slightly high in the bow, bobbing on the swell instead of cutting through it. Your weight, 170 pounds give or take, presses the stem down just enough to keep the boat steady, and you have learned over the years exactly where to place your feet for the best trim. If you shift even an inch too far forward, the bow will dig in and throw a small spray of water back at the oarsman too far back, and the boat will wallow, losing its sense of direction. So you stand exactly where you need to be, in a spot that your feet have memorized, and you do not move from it unless the mate tells you to, which he rarely does. The mate's voice comes from the stern occasionally, a low murmur that you understand more by its tone than its words. He may say easy, and the oarsmen will rest, their blades trailing in the water, and the boat will glide for a while in silence. He may say a little starboard, and the stroke oar on the port side will pull slightly harder for a single stroke, and you will feel the bow swing a degree or two to the right, aligning itself with the whale's new position, but most of the time he says nothing. And the silence stretches out like the horizon itself, unbroken and immense. In that silence, your mind settles into a place that is neither focused nor wandering, a place where thoughts drift through and then drift away, leaving no trace. You might think of the ship, or of the green hills of a home port that you have not seen in years, or of the taste of fresh water. But these thoughts do not stick. They come and go like the foam lines on the sea, thin and temporary. The whaleboat is a world small enough to be known completely. You know every knot in the wood, every splice in the line, every scratch on the harpoon iron. You know that the second plank on the port side has a slight check in the grain that weeps a bead of water in a rough sea, though there is no rough sea today. You know that the loggerhead, the stout post around which the line takes a turn to control its running, is worn into a smooth groove on its afterside from the friction of heavy lines pulled through at speed on other days. But those other days are not this day. This day is calm, and the loggerhead is dry, and the line lies in its tub without moving, and the groove is just a detail to notice while you wait. The sun remains hidden behind the cloud layer, but the light has changed subtly since the boat was lowered. It is a little brighter now, a little whiter, as if the sun is climbing toward noon behind its veil. The water reflects this light in a broad diffused sheen that makes it hard to tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. Shadows are weak, just suggestions of darkness under the boat and under the distant whale. The horizon is a soft line, blurred by haze, and the islands are now so faint they could be mistaken for clouds if you did not know they were land. You look at them from time to time, but mostly you look forward, toward the whale, which is still there, still spouting, still calm. Your stillness in the bow is a kind of discipline, though it does not feel like one. It is simply what the work requires. A steerer must be motionless, so that the boat can approach without alarming the whale, must be silent, so that the only sounds are the natural ones of the sea. You have learned to hold your body in such a way that even your breathing does not disturb the air, exhaling slowly out of the side of your mouth, so that the vapor does not rise in a cloud. It is a small thing, a detail, but in the vast quiet of the ocean, small things matter. The whale can hear a splash from 100 yards away, can feel the vibration of a clumsy oar through the water, can see a sudden movement above the surface. So you do not move suddenly. You do not move at all. The temperature is such that you hardly notice your own skin. You are wearing only a pair of canvas trousers, faded to a soft white, and a loose cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled above your elbows. The sun, even behind the clouds, has warmed the air enough that you are comfortable without a jacket, and the breeze that occasionally lifts the hair on your forearms is a cool relief rather than a chill. Your feet are bare on the warm wood, the soles tough from walking on deck planks and rough wharf stones, and you can feel the faint texture of the grain, The small ridge where one plank overlaps another, the smooth head of a copper nail. It is a grounding sensation, something to anchor you in the present, though the present is so drawn out that it seems to have no edges. The oarsmen behind you are resting again, their oars shipped, the blades dripping slow drops into the sea. You hear the drops, each one a tiny plink that spreads a ring of ripples, and then the ring fades, and the sea is glassy again. One of the men clears his throat, a soft sound that is immediately swallowed by the open air. Another shifts his weight on his thwart and the boat rocks slightly, a single slow tilt that corrects itself. No one speaks. The whale is up ahead, closer now, its spout a more definite column, and you can see the dark knob of its head, the long ridge of its back, the slight wrinkling of the skin where the neck would be if a whale had a neck. It is a sperm whale, a bull, large and solitary, and it moves with a slowness that matches the boat's own pace, drifting on the surface between dives as if it too is waiting for something. Your hand on the harpoon has not moved, but your awareness of it has sharpened the way your eyes might adjust to a dim room. The iron is heavy at the top, and you feel its balance, the slight pull it exerts against your wrist. The line is still, the tub is still, the boat is still. In front of you the stem cuts through the water with a faint continuous hiss, parting the sea into two thin lines of foam that run away down the sides. You watch those lines, the way they widen and then disappear, the way the water rejoins itself behind the boat as if you had never passed. It is a quiet, repetitive thing to watch, like watching a clock if a clock had no hands and no numbers, just a slow, steady pulse. Time in the bow is measured by the whale's breathing. You count the intervals between spouts, 40 of your own heartbeats, 50, 45 again. The whale is resting, taking a series of shallow dives, staying near the surface to breathe. Soon it will sound deeper, and then you will have to wait longer, the boat drifting alone on the swells for half an hour or more while the whale feeds in the depths. But that has not happened yet. For now, the whale is there, and the boat is approaching, and you are standing in your place, feeling the familiar weight of the harpoon, the familiar texture of the gunwale, the familiar rhythm of the sea. The world is reduced to these few things, and in their simplicity they are enough, filling the long quiet morning with their calm and patient presence. The harpoon in your hand is not a single object, but a collection of parts that have been brought together by a blacksmith, a ship's carpenter, and many seasons of use. The iron at the top is the oldest part, forged in a shop on the waterfront of a port that is now many thousands of miles away. It was made from a bar of the best Swedish iron, heated in a coal fire until it glowed a deep orange yellow, then hammered on an anvil into a flat, leaf-shaped blade. The smith drew the metal out thin at the cutting edge, left it thicker at the center for strength, and bent one side into a barb that curves backward like the thorn on a rose stem. The barb is not sharpened on its inside edge, only on the point, and its purpose is not to cut, but to hold, to catch in the whale's flesh and prevent the iron from pulling free once it has entered. The main blade is sharpened along one side, the other side left blunt, and the whole iron is about 2 feet long from the point to the socket where it joins the wooden shaft. Its surface is dark, mottled with rust and oil, and it absorbs the soft light of the overcast sky without reflecting any of it back. The shaft is made of hickory, a wood chosen for its combination of strength and springiness, and it is nearly 6 feet in length, straight as a ruled line. The tree it came from grew in a forest somewhere in the eastern part of the continent, a slow-growth hickory with tight rings and no knots, and it was cut, seasoned, and turned by a spar maker who supplied the whaling fleet with handles and poles of every kind. The shaft tapers slightly from the butt to the iron, a supple reduction in diameter that makes it easier to grip but harder to see, and its surface has been scraped smooth and then rubbed with linseed oil until it has the feel of old leather. The oil has darkened the wood over time, giving it a deep amber-brown color, and in a few places there are faint dents where something struck it, a boat hook or a lance handle, leaving a small impression that only your fingers know. Your right hand wraps around the shaft about a foot below the iron, where a slight thickening of the wood gives your palm a natural place to rest, and your grip is light, just enough to feel the balance of the heavy iron above compensating for the lighter wood below. The place where iron and wood meet is a critical one, and it has been reinforced with a long socket and a series of bindings. The socket is a hollow cone at the base of the iron, into which the tip of the hickory shaft fits snugly. To keep it there, the ship's armourer drove a soft iron pin through both metal and wood, then peened the ends over until they were flat and flush, so that nothing projects to catch on a line or a hand. Over that, as an added precaution, a tight whipping of marline has been wound and then varnished, creating a dark, shiny wrap that covers the last 6 inches of the shaft and the first 2 inches of the socket. The marline is a small gauge hemp twine, tarred and very strong, and each turn lies against the next with a precision that speaks of a quiet afternoon at sea, a sailor sitting on the deck with the harpoon across his knees, methodically binding and pulling tight. The varnish has hardened into a smooth amber shell that catches the light in thin lines, and your thumb can feel the faint ridges of the twine through the coating. Below the binding, the shaft is bare, and you can trace the grain with your eyes when you are not looking at the whale. The grain is a series of long, parallel lines, interrupted occasionally by a darker streak, where the tree's growth slowed for a season, and the hickory has a natural luster that linseed oil only deepens. The butt of the shaft is squared off, not rounded, with a small iron ferrule to prevent splitting, and it rests now in the bottom of the crotch where it has been placed since the boat was lowered. The crotch is a simple fork of oak lined with sheepskin leather that has been glued and tacked into place, and the leather is now dark and shiny from years of holding the harpoon's butt, molded into a cup shape that fits the squared end perfectly. When the boat is not in use, the harpoon is stowed elsewhere, but during an approach it sits here, upright and ready, and you do not need to look to know exactly where it is. Beside the harpoon, in a low wooden box that is fastened to the bow platform, lies a second iron, identical to the first but wrapped in a piece of old canvas to protect its edge. This is a spare, kept for the possibility that the first might be lost or broken. But in all your years of steering, you have rarely needed it, and it has lain there so long that the canvas is faded and soft, its folds permanent. The box is open at the top, with a simple latch that has never been closed, and the spare iron rests on a bed of oakum to absorb the shock when the boat hits a swell. You do not think about the spare iron any more than you think about the spare oar that lies along the boat's bottom. It is part of the boat's inventory, a quiet presence that asks for nothing. The line that is attached to the harpoon is the true connection between you and the whale, and it fills a tub that sits on the boat's bottom just behind your position. The tub is a half-barrel, a cask sword in 2 around its waist, with the lower half kept and reinforced by iron hoops. It is wide and shallow, perhaps 2 feet across and a foot deep, and it is fixed in place by cleats nailed to the floorboards so that it cannot shift. Inside, the whale line has been coiled with an exacting care that only a whaleman would understand. The line is 200 fathoms long, which is 1,200 feet, and it is made of the finest hemp, each strand first soaked in tar to resist rot and then twisted under tension into a 3-strand rope that is both flexible and immensely strong. The tar has turned the line a dark brown, almost black, and up close it has a faint sheen, a slight stickiness that grips against itself and helps the coils stay in place. Coiling the line is an art that every boat steerer learns, and the process takes hours on a calm day before the hunt. The line is first drawn out of the tub and run the length of the ship's deck, then slowly hauled back in, each coil laid flat against the one before it, never crossing, never kinking. The layers are built up from the bottom of the tub in a spiral, like the rings of a tree, and care is taken to ensure that the end that will run out first is the one that lies on top, so that it can fly free without catching. In the very center of the coil, a small space is left open like the hole in a donut, and through this space the line rises to the top coil, where it is attached to the harpoon by a short length of chain. The chain is made of hand-forged links, each one about the size of a thumb joint, and it serves as a flexible connector that will not chafe through against the boat's wood when the line pulls tight. The chain lies across the top of the line tub in a loose curve, and from where you stand you can see it clearly, each link a matte grey against the dark of the tarred hemp. From the tub, the line leads forward, passing through a notch in the bow thwart that has been lined with leather to prevent chafing, then around the loggerhead, and finally to the harpoon's chain. The loggerhead is a stout wooden post about a foot tall and 3 inches thick, bolted to the boat's keel and rising through a hole in the forward floorboard. Its purpose is to provide a surface around which the line can take a single turn, creating enough friction that a man can control the running line with his bare hands, regulating the speed at which it pays out when a whale is fast and diving. The loggerhead is worn smooth along its afterside from this constant rubbing, the wood polished to a dark shine, while the forward side remains rougher, the grain still visible. There is no line around it now. The turn is not taken until the moment before the strike, and so the loggerhead stands idle, a patient post waiting in the half-light under the bow platform. Beside you, within reach of your left hand, is a small hatchet with a short handle, its blade kept very sharp. It is called a waif, and its purpose is to cut the line in an emergency, should the whale sound so deep that the boat would be dragged under before the line could be paid out. The waif rests in a leather sheath that is tacked to the inside of the gunwale, the handle protruding just enough for your fingers to find it instantly. You have never had to use it, and the blade is free of rust, coated with a thin smear of whale oil to keep it bright. It is one more small thing in the bow, one more detail among many, and you are aware of it in the same way you are aware of the spare iron or the second-line tub that lies further aft, a peripheral awareness that requires no attention. The feeling of standing with the harpoon is something that has become so ingrained that your body settles into it as if into a familiar chair. The weight of the iron is a steady downward pull on your wrist, and your forearm compensates by holding a slight tension, a tiny isometric effort that keeps the shaft balanced upright. The wood of the gunwale under your left hand is a constant, a reference point, and you can feel through it the slight vibrations of the boat, the low hum of the water moving past the planks, the occasional tap of an oar blade accidentally striking the side. These sensations travel up your arm and merge with the rhythm of your breathing, the slow rise and fall of your chest, the soft pulse in your temples that beats about once a second. Together they create a quiet, steady state, a kind of calm alertness that has no sharp edges and no peaks. The line in the tub, as you watch it without watching, makes no sound. It lies so still that it seems almost a solid object, a dark pool of rope, and yet you know that if the whale were to dive suddenly and run, that pool would transform in an instant into a blur of motion, the line singing through the notch, the friction heating the loggerhead, the steam rising from the wet hemp as it races out. But that is not happening now. Now, the whale is still on the surface, still breathing, still drifting. The line remains at rest, and you remain at rest with it. The only movement in the tub is a faint settling, a tiny shift as the boat rides over a slightly larger swell and the whole coil compresses a fraction of an inch. Then the swell passes and the line settles back, silent again. The harpoon is not a weapon in the ordinary sense, and you do not think of it as one. It is a tool for making a connection, a long, sharp bridge between your boat and the whale. Once the iron is set, the line becomes a tether, and the boat becomes a drag, and the whale tows you through the water until it tires, a process that can take hours or even a whole afternoon. But that is a matter for a different chapter, a different day. Right now, the iron is clean, the line is dry, and the whale does not yet know you are here. The bridge has not yet been crossed, and you are content to stand in the bow and feel the weight of the harpoon in your hand, the texture of the shaft, the slight coolness of the iron when a puff of breeze passes over it. The air temperature has not changed, still warm and still, and the light continues its slow brightening as the sun climbs unseen behind the cloud cover. The water around the boat has taken on a more silvery tone now, the blue deepening to a soft slate in the troughs and lightening to a pale pewter on the crests. A small school of flying fish erupts 100 yards to port, their bodies a flash of silver as they skim the surface for 20 or 30 yards and then disappear. You watch them without moving your head, your eyes tracking the quick arcs and then returning to the whale. The oarsmen behind you have seen them too, and one of them murmurs something too low to understand, but no one replies. The boat continues on its slow path, and the harpoon continues to rest in its crotch. The second harpoon, the spare in its box, has a story of its own, though you do not think about it often. It was forged in the same shop as the first, by the same smith, and it carries the same maker's mark, a small stamped star on the side of the socket that has been half obscured by rust. The canvas that wraps it is a piece of old sailcloth, with a faded red thread running through the weave that once marked it as belonging to a particular ship, a ship that has since been broken up or lost. The canvas is tied with a piece of marline that has been tied and untied many times, the knot now a hard, permanent lump, and the iron inside is sharp, coated with a thicker layer of grease than the one in your hand because it is not handled. It waits in its box like a sleeper, and you pass your eyes over it as you scan the boat's gear, a quick automatic check that every part of your responsibility is present and in its place. The line tub gurgles faintly when the boat rolls, a sound made by the small amount of seawater that has collected in the bottom of the tub and now washes back and forth across the lower coils. The water is there because the line was soaped before the hunt, a precaution to make the hemp more pliable and less likely to kink, and it has not had time to dry. It moves in slow waves, a miniature tide that laps against the edges of the coils, and the sound is a gentle liquid murmur that blends with the splash of the oars and the hiss of the bow wave. You hear it without listening, your ears tuned to the overall quiet, and you note that the water level is low, as it should be, meaning the line has not absorbed enough to become heavy and slow to run. Everything is as it should be. The loggerhead stands in front of you, a dark post against the lighter wood of the boat, and you can see the slight indentations where the line has bitten into it over the years, shallow grooves that run diagonally across the grain. The top of the loggerhead is flat, with a small hole drilled through it where a lanyard is tied, and the lanyard disappears down under the floorboards where it is made fast to a ring bolt. It is there to prevent the loggerhead from being torn out if a whale dives unexpectedly hard, an event that you have seen happen once on another boat, and the memory of it is just a shadow, a thing that happened to someone else, someone who was not you. Today there is no such danger. The whale is calm, and the loggerhead stands idle, and the lanyard lies slack. Your right hand has been in the same position for so long that you feel the warmth of the wood where your palm has rested, a small localized heat that contrasts with the coolness of the air. The skin of your palm is calloused, the calluses shaped by the harpoon shaft and the oar handles and the ropes you have handled over the decades, and they form raised pads at the base of your fingers and across the heel of your hand. The calluses are dry and cracked in places, the cracks yellow-white against the darker skin, and they do not hurt. They are simply a part of your body's adaptation to the work. You adjust your grip a fraction, shifting the shaft from one part of your palm to another, and then return to stillness. The line is a promise that has not yet been made. It lies in its tub with the patience of a coiled snake, and you know that when the time comes, it will run out with a speed that can burn a man's hands and smoke against the wood. But you also know that the time has not come, and you are in no hurry for it to arrive. The morning is long, the whale is slow, and your place in the bow is comfortable. You watch the swell, you watch the spout, you feel the harpoon's weight, and you let the minutes pass without counting them. The boat moves forward at the pace of a walking man who is in no hurry to reach his destination, and you settle deeper into your stillness, a part of the boat and the gear and the sea, waiting in the quiet, with the iron resting and the line coiled and the morning stretched out ahead of you like a long, calm ocean. Behind you, in the long, narrow space of the whaleboat, the 5 oarsmen sit on their thwarts, and their presence is a quiet constant that you feel without turning your head. They are arranged in the order that the mate has set, a pattern worked out through years of shared labor so that the boat will balance and the stroke will be smooth. The harpooner sits on the forwardmost thwart, just a few feet behind your back, a man whose job is to throw the second iron if needed or to take up the lance later, but for now he pulls an oar with the rest. Behind him are the stroke oar and the tub oarsman on the port side, and on the starboard side the midship oar and the bow oar, though the bow oar is not at the bow but at the front of the rowing section, a name that lingers from an older arrangement. They are all facing aft, their backs to you, and you see only the tops of their shoulders, the backs of their heads, the movement of their arms as they pull. It is a view so familiar that it has become like the grain of the gunwale under your hand, something known without being noticed. The oars they hold are long ash sweeps, each one about 14 feet from handle to blade, with a loom that is rounded and worn where the thole pins press against it. The blades are narrow, designed for a long, steady pull rather than a quick sprint, and they enter the water at a shallow angle, making hardly a splash. You hear the rhythm of the stroke before you see it, a soft intake of breath from the men, then the creak of the thole pins as the oars begin their arc, then the low liquid sound of the blades biting into the sea, and the faint rush of water along the shafts. The recovery is just as quiet, the oars leaving the water with a whisper, the drops falling back in a scattering of tiny sounds, the loom sliding forward in the pins with a polished hush. It is a slow rhythm, perhaps 20 strokes in a minute, maybe fewer, paced to match the whale's drifting and the endless patience of the morning. The hull pins are oak pegs set into the gunwale in pairs, and between them the oar loom rides, held in place by a leather strap called a grommet that keeps the oar from sliding out. Over time, the pegs have been rubbed smooth by the constant pivoting, their tops flattened and shiny, and the grommets have molded themselves into oval shapes from the pressure of the looms. You can hear the slight difference in sound between a port oar and a starboard oar. The starboard pin's a little tighter, the port one's a little looser, producing a very faint difference in pitch that only someone who has spent hundreds of hours in this boat would notice. It is not a distraction. It is a part of the texture of the quiet, a thread in the fabric of the approach. The oarsmen themselves are quiet. They have been together in this boat for many months, and they have long since exhausted the need for talk. What needs to be said is said by the mate in the stern, and the men respond with silence and with the precise execution of their duty. Occasionally, one of them will shift his weight on the hard wooden thwart, and the boat will rock slightly. A small roll that travels up to your bow and then subsides. Another may wipe the sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist, a quick gesture that does not interrupt the stroke. Their breathing is the loudest thing about them, a steady, deep rhythm that matches the pull and recovery, and it merges with the sound of the sea until you cannot separate one from the other. You know these men, not by their faces at this moment, but by the particular feel of their presence. The stroke oar who sets the cadence is a man with a long, slow pull that never varies, his oar entering the water at exactly the same angle every time. His recovery smooth enough to let the boat glide between strokes. He sits furthest aft among the rowers, and his rhythm is the heartbeat of the boat, a steady metronome that the others follow. You can feel his influence in the way the boat surges forward with each stroke, a tiny acceleration that dies away so gently you can barely perceive it, leaving the boat to coast for a fraction of a second before the next stroke begins. The midship oar is a young man, still learning the deeper silences of the hunt, and sometimes his stroke is a fraction too eager, a hair too quick, but the stroke oar's even tempo pulls him back into line. You can hear the slight difference in the sound of his oar, a tiny splash that the others do not make, but it is so slight that it would not alarm the whale. The harpooner behind you, the one who would be second in the attack, rows with the steadiness of a man who knows that his main work may come later, his pull efficient and calm. The tub oarsman, who sits beside the line tubs in the middle of the boat, is the strongest of the crew, and his deep, even breathing is a low bass note under the higher sounds of the pins and the water. The bow oar, opt forward on the starboard side, is the oldest, his movements economical, his blade kissing the sea with a softness born of decades. The mate stands in the stern, his hand on the long steering oar that trails aft from the boat's quarter. He does not row. His job is to guide the boat, to watch the whale, and to speak when speech is needed. His voice is a low murmur that carries forward along the length of the boat, not a command in the military sense, but a quiet statement of intent. He might say, "Easy all," and the oars will stop, the men holding their blades just above the water while the boat drifts. He might say, "Give way," and the rhythm will resume as if it had never paused. His words are few, spoken in a tone that matches the hush of the sea, and they are the only human sounds that break the long stretches of silence. You listen for his voice without straining, and you respond not with words, but with a slight adjustment of your stance, a tiny shift of the harpoon, though usually no adjustment is needed. The silence between the mate's commands is the true language of the boat. It is a silence made of many small sounds that blend together into a kind of quiet music, the creak of the hull pins, the whisper of the oar blades, the low hiss of the bow wave, the faint slap of a small ripple against the planking, the distant sigh of the whale's spout, the soft rush of your own breath past your lips. No one coughs, no one speaks, no one drops an oar or scrapes a boot on the floorboards. The men have learned to move in this tight space without noise, to shift their weight slowly, to wipe their hands on their trousers without making a sound, to live in the quiet as naturally as they live in their own skin. The boat's rhythm is not something you count, it is something you absorb. The stroke enters your body through the soles of your feet, the gentle surge and glide that rocks you forward and back a fraction of an inch each time. Your knees bend almost imperceptibly with the surge, then straighten with the glide, a tiny dance that keeps your head level and your eyes fixed on the whale. Behind you, the oarsmen are doing the same, their bodies swaying forward and back on the thwarts, their spines curling and uncurling, their arms pulling and recovering in a motion that has become automatic. If you were to turn and look, you would see a row of heads moving in unison, a slow, synchronized wave of human effort, but you do not turn, and the image is only in your mind, a memory of many other days when you have glanced back and seen it. The harpooner behind you is close enough that you can sometimes hear the slight rustle of his shirt when he moves, a soft cotton sound that is distinct from the heavier canvas of the other men. He is a quiet man, the harpooner, chosen for his steadiness and his nerve, and he holds his oar with the same calm that you hold the harpoon. His job, when the time comes, is to stand and take up the lance or the second harpoon, to be ready to strike again if the first iron does not hold. But that time is not now, and he rows on with the rest, his breathing slow, his presence a solid reassurance at your back. The tub oarsman, the strong one, sits amidships where the boat is widest, and his oar is the longest on that side. You can hear the deeper note of his blade, a more substantial sound as it pulls through the water, and you know that without his steady power the boat would move more slowly, the approach drawn out even longer. He breathes through his nose, a soft, continuous sound that you can pick out when the other noises fade for a moment, and it is as steady as a bellows, in and out, in and out. A slow pump of air that has been doing this work for so long it has forgotten how to be irregular. The bow oar, the old man, has a slight hitch in his stroke, something you noticed the first week you were together and have not thought about since. His right shoulder clicks faintly at the end of the recovery, a tiny dry sound like a twig snapping, and it happens every third or fourth stroke, never more, never less. It is a part of the boat's rhythm now, a small percussion that marks the passage of time without meaning anything. He never complains, and no one mentions it, and the whale does not hear it or does not care. The morning light falls on the backs of the oarsmen, touching their necks and their shoulders with a pale, diffuse warmth. They are dressed in the same way you are, in canvas trousers and cotton shirts faded by salt and sun, their sleeves rolled up, their feet bare. Their skin is brown from months at sea, their hair bleached light at the tips, and you can see the muscles in their forearms working as they pull, the tendons shifting under the skin. It is a scene of quiet labor, unheroic and unhurried, a small human machine moving through the vastness of the ocean with no more fuss than a drifting log. Between strokes, when the oars are feathered and the boat is gliding, the world seems to hold its breath. The sounds drop away to almost nothing, the faint hiss of the water along the hull, the distant wash of a swell, the low murmur of the mate if he speaks. In these intervals the silence is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat, a steady thud in your ears that is slower than the stroke pace, perhaps 50 beats in a minute, perhaps less. Your heart is calm, unexcited, a resting heart beating for no other purpose than to keep you alive and alert. The oarsmen's hearts beat too, a set of 5 quiet drums in the boat, and you imagine you can feel them through the planks. A faint vibration that is probably not real, but feels true. The sea around the boat remains gentle, the swells long and even, and the boat rides them with a motion that is almost restful. When a slightly larger swell passes, the bow lifts a little higher, then settles a little deeper, and the oarsmen adjust their stroke timing to match the new angle, pulling a fraction harder on the upslope and easing on the downslope. It is a subtle adjustment, made without words, and it happens so smoothly that you notice it only as a slight change in the sound of the blades. The mate holds the steering oar steady, keeping the boat on its intercept course, and the whale continues to spout ahead, closer now, but still unhurried. Occasionally the mate will stand up in the stern to get a better view over the heads of the men, and you will feel the boat rock slightly with his movement. He is a careful man, the mate, and he moves slowly, his bare feet gripping the planks, his hand never leaving the steering oar. When he sits again, the boat settles back into its trim, and the rhythm continues. He is watching the whale with an attention that is even greater than your own, reading the animal's movements and the patterns of its dives, calculating the approach. But his calculations are silent, and the men feel them only as tiny corrections to their heading, a slight pressure on the steering oar that changes the boat's angle by a degree or two. The gear in the boat is stowed with the same care that governs the rowing. The lances rest in their racks along the sides, their sharp blades covered with bits of leather to prevent accidents. The water keg is lashed under a thwart, its bung tight and silent. The hatchets are in their sheaths, the waifs are in theirs, and nothing rattles or clinks. The whole boat is a collection of objects secured against noise, a floating library of quietude. Even the men themselves seem to be stowed, fitted into their places like the oars, each one a part of the silent machine. The silence behind you is not an empty silence. It is a full, shared stillness that holds the boat together. It is the silence of men who have chosen to be calm, who have learned over years that noise serves nothing on the hunting grounds. They could talk if they wanted to, could joke and murmur and pass the time, but they do not. They save their words for the ship, for the long evenings on deck when the day's work is done and the lantern light flickers on their faces. Out here, in the boat, words are a disturbance, and the men have become experts at not disturbing. You feel this silence as a pressure on your back, a comforting presence that lets you focus on the sea ahead. It is like a hand laid gently on your shoulder, a reassurance that everything behind you is in order, that the oars are pulling, that the mate is watching, that the line is ready. You do not need to check on them, and they do not need to check on you. Each person in the boat is an island of quiet responsibility, and the sum of their stillness is a single, unified calm. The whale ahead blows again, a soft, exhaling sound that carries across the water, and you see the mist of its spout hang for a moment, and then dissolve. The mate says nothing, and the oarsmen pull on. The distance is closing, but it is closing at the pace of the sea itself, a slow, inevitable convergence that has no urgency. You stand in the bow with the harpoon resting, and behind you the 5 oarsmen row in their silent cadence, their blades dipping and lifting, their breath steady, their presence a quiet song that has no words and no end, only the slow, patient rhythm of the approach. Far ahead and just to starboard, where the sea meets the pale grey sky in a line so soft it might be a fold in the fabric of the morning, the sperm whale rises to breathe. The first sign is not a shape, but a small interruption in the even texture of the horizon, a place where the light scatters differently, as though a patch of the air has become momentarily thicker. It is the spout, a low bushy column of white mist that appears from the sea without warning and hangs there for a short while, angled forward and to the left in a characteristic slant that tells you the whale is a sperm whale before you ever see its body. The spout is not tall and straight like the spout of a fin whale, nor is it a high thin plume. It is short and dense, almost shrubby, a quick puff of condensation that blossoms and then begins to thin at the edges almost immediately. You watch it from the bow with no change in your stance, your left hand still resting on the gunwale and your right still holding the harpoon in its crotch. The spout is far away, perhaps a mile and a half, and the sound of it does not reach you at this distance. What you perceive is purely visual, a brief white brushstroke on the grey canvas of the sky, a mark that lingers for 2 or 3 of your slow breaths, and then fades back into the general haze. The sea around the spout remains smooth, the swell continuing its long, even roll, and for a moment after the mist dissolves there is nothing to see but the water heaving gently under the clouded light. Then the body of the whale follows, rising from the sea in stages that are so slow they seem to be part of the swell itself. First a dark knob appears, the top of the whale's enormous head, a blunt, squared-off shape that is almost black against the paler water. The head is massive, making up nearly a third of the animal's length, and it rises without hurry until the blowhole, a raised ridge set far forward and to the left side, clears the surface and opens. From your distance, the blowhole is too small to see as a feature. You know it only by the position of the spout that has just issued from it. The head continues to rise, showing more of its dark bulk, and then the neck and the long ridge of the back begin to appear, unrolling behind the head in a slow, continuous curve, like a wet rope being pulled very gently from the sea. The whale's back is a dark brown grey, the color of old oak that has been soaked in brine, and it is mottled with lighter patches and long pale scars. Some of the scars are from battles with other whales or with giant squid, whose sucker marks leave circular white rings that never quite heal. Others are from encounters with ships or from the chafing of the sea itself. The skin looks smooth from this distance, but you know that up close it is wrinkled and creased, especially around the neck where the animal folds when it dives. The dorsal fin, if it can be called that, is a small hump set far back along the spine, followed by a series of knuckles that diminish in size toward the tail. None of these details are visible yet. You see only the long, dark shape of the whale rolling along the surface, a quiet presence that seems to have no need to hurry. The whale stays on the surface for a while, breathing. After the first spout, it exhales again several times, each spout a little less bushy than the one before, as the animal clears the stale air from its lungs and takes in fresh. The spouts are spaced by intervals that you have learned to count without thinking, using your own heartbeat or the slow pull of the oars behind you. There is a rhythm to them, a deep inhale that you cannot hear, then the long, damp sigh of the exhale, then a pause of perhaps 40 or 50 heartbeats before the next one. The pause is never exactly the same length, varying by a few beats as the whale shifts its body or adjusts its depth. But the overall cadence is steady, a breathing pattern that matches the slow pulse of the ocean itself. The sound of the spout, when it finally reaches you across the water, is a soft, muffled exhalation, not sharp like a sneeze, but loose and damp, like a great bellows made of wet leather. It arrives after the visual of the spout has already begun to fade, the sound lagging behind the light because of the distance, and this small delay is something you notice every time. A gentle reminder of how far away the whale still is. The sound blends with the hiss of the boat's stem cutting through the sea and the creak of the thole pins behind you, and if you were not listening for it, you might miss it altogether. It is not a sound that demands attention, it simply is, a part of the morning's quiet texture. Between the spouts, the whale drifts on the surface, its long back visible as a dark ridge that rises and falls with the swell. The body is so large that it seems to move in its own time, independent of the sea around it, the swells passing under it as if it were a piece of the landscape rather than a living creature. The head, when it is at the surface, pushes a small bow wave ahead of it, a thin line of foam that breaks around the blunt snout and trails back along the sides. You watch this wave, the way it catches the soft light, and you see that the whale is moving very slowly to the northwest, a drift rather than a swim, carried partly by the current and partly by its own lazy momentum. The whale's eye, when the head is turned just right, appears as a small dark spot low on the side of the immense skull, but you cannot see it from where you are. You know the eye is there, a calm watching organ that may or may not have registered the boat. Sperm whales have good vision above and below the water, and they are curious animals, sometimes approaching ships or boats out of what seems like simple interest. But this whale shows no sign of curiosity. It has not altered its course, has not lifted its head to look, has not sounded in alarm. It is simply existing in the same stretch of ocean as you are, its presence a gift of the quiet morning rather than an intrusion. The oars behind you continue their slow rhythm, the stroke oar keeping the cadence steady, and the mate in the stern says nothing. There is no command to row faster, no whispered urgency about closing the gap before the whale sounds. The approach is being made with a patience that the sea itself teaches, a patience that understands the whale will do what it does in its own time, and the only thing you can control is your own stillness. You watch the spout appear and dissolve, appear again and dissolve again, each time a little closer as the boat eats away at the distance in its unhurried way. The light through the high overcast has brightened subtly, the pale grey sky now touched with a faint warmth that suggests the sun is climbing past the zenith. The water reflects this change in a slight shift of colour, the deep slate blue of the troughs taking on a more silvery sheen, the foam of the whale's bow wave a brighter white. The spout, when it blooms, catches this light and holds it for a few seconds, the mist sparkling faintly before it dims and vanishes. There is no rainbow in the spout today. The angle of the sun behind the clouds is wrong for that. Instead, there is just the soft white column a clean, simple exhalation that comes and goes like a slow breath on a cold day, though the day is far from cold. You've been watching the spout for what feels like a long time, though you have no way to measure the minutes. The whale has taken 6 breaths, maybe 7, and now it is beginning to arch its back slightly, the head settling a little deeper in the water, the ridge of the spine lifting in a gentle curve. This is the signal that it is about to dive. The arch becomes more pronounced, the body rolling forward and down, and the flukes, those broad triangular tail fins that spread like the wings of a giant bird, begin to rise from the water. They come up slowly, the dark, wet tips breaking the surface first, then the whole flukes appearing, water streaming off their edges in thin silver sheets. The flukes are nearly 16 feet across, smooth and dark on top with a lighter underside, and they hang there for a moment as the whale's body slides down into the depths. Then they too slip under, leaving only a smooth circular patch of calm water where the animal has been. A glassy pool that spreads outward in gentle rings and then fades as the swell reclaims it. The whale is gone below, and you will not see it again for some time. Sperm whales can dive for half an hour or more, descending to depths where the light never reaches, to hunt for squid in the cold, dark canyons of the ocean floor. You do not know exactly how deep this whale will go, but you know that the water here is very deep, thousands of fathoms, and the whale is comfortable in that depth in a way that you cannot imagine. The boat, meanwhile, remains on the surface, a small wooden shell riding the long, slow swells, waiting. The oarsmen rest, their blades still, the boat drifting. The mate stands in the stern, one hand on the steering oar, and you stand in the bow, your hands still on the harpoon, your eyes scanning the water where the whale disappeared. During the dive, the sea seems to grow even quieter, if that is possible. The absence of the spout is like the absence of a familiar sound, a clock that has stopped ticking, and you become aware of the other small sounds more clearly. The faint wash of water against the planks, the soft creak of the mast on the distant ship, the murmur of the breeze that has finally begun to stir. A tiny wave laps against the side of the boat, a sound so small it is almost absorbed by the wood. Someone behind you shifts his weight, and the boat rocks a fraction, then steadies. You wait. The whale will surface again, you know. It will not stay down forever, and when it comes up it will likely be somewhere ahead of you, perhaps closer, perhaps farther, depending on the direction it chose to swim underwater. You have seen whales travel half a mile or more during a single dive, moving silently through the deep with a speed that surprises those who think of them as slow animals. But you do not worry about where the whale will appear. The mate in the stern is watching, and he will direct the boat when the time comes. For now, you simply wait, your eyes resting on the empty water, your body swaying with the swell. The cloud cover overhead is thinned in one place, and a patch of paler sky shows through. The sun, a bright disk of white gold that is still too high and too hazy to cast shadows. The light on the water shifts again, the surface becoming a pale, luminous grey-green in that one spot, then returning to slate. The islands far off to the east are a little clearer now, their volcanic peaks soft against the sky, but more defined than they were an hour ago. You can see the individual cones, the darker slopes of old lava flows, the faint green of vegetation on the lower hills. It is a quiet landscape sleeping in the distance, and it has not changed since you arrived in these waters weeks ago. It will not change for millennia. The oarsmen rest, their oars shipped, and you hear one of them take a drink from the small water keg, the hollow glug of the water, followed by the soft thud of the cork being replaced. Another man clears his throat, a low sound that is quickly gone. The mate sits on the stern sheets, his eyes fixed on the sea ahead, his hand still on the steering oar. No one speaks, and the silence stretches on, a comfortable, shared quiet that has no edge and no weight. You breathe in the salt air and let your gaze soften, not focusing on any particular point, just taking in the whole wide circle of the horizon. After a time, the whale surfaces again. It appears without warning, the bushy spout blooming suddenly on the water, maybe 1,000 yards ahead and a little to port, the mist hanging for its short moment, and then thinning. The head rises behind it, the dark knob followed by the long ridge of the back, and the breathing cycle begins again. The mate murmurs something, and the oarsmen bend to their work, the blades dipping, the rhythm resuming. The boat turns slightly, aligning with the whale's new position, and the slow approach continues. The spout is closer now, close enough that you can see more detail in the mist. It is not a uniform cloud, but a collection of fine droplets, each one catching the light and then fading. The sound of the exhale reaches you more quickly, a soft, rushing puff that is louder than before but still gentle. You can smell the whale now, a faint warm odor that drifts across the water, oily and a little sweet, like a candle that has been extinguished. The smell comes and goes with the breeze, and you breathe it in without reaction, noting it as a sign that the distance is shrinking. The whale's head, when it turns slightly, reveals the long, narrow lower jaw, which is set far back under the enormous skull. The jaw is lined with teeth, big conical teeth that fit into sockets in the upper jaw, but you cannot see them from here. You can see the white of the lower jaw, a pale curve against the dark of the head, and you can see the eye, a small, dark, intelligent presence that seems to look back at you for a moment before the head turns away. The whale is not alarmed. Its movements are slow and regular, its breathing steady. It has accepted the boat as a part of its environment, or perhaps it has not yet decided what the boat is. Either way, it does not flee. The oarsmen pull on, their stroke a measured, unhurried beat, and the bow of the boat cuts through the water toward the whale. You watch the spout rise and fall, each time a little nearer, each time a little more detailed. The mist of the spout, when it catches the light just right, reveals a faint iridescence, a shimmer of colors that is too subtle to name. It is there and gone, a ghost of a rainbow, and then the spout fades and the whale breathes in again. You count the intervals, the slow rhythm of the animal's life, and you match your own breathing to it without meaning to. In and out, the whale breathes. In and out, you breathe. The boat glides on, and the distance closes with the gentle inevitability of the tide. The surface of the sea between the boat and the whale is a field of gentle undulations that stretches away in every direction until it meets the soft grey line of the horizon. A line so faint it is more a suggestion than a boundary. Each swell is as broad and smooth as a sleeping dune, its slope so gradual that the eye cannot measure where one ends and the next begins. The water does not break or foam. It simply rises and falls in a rhythm that has been traveling across the Pacific for thousands of miles, a pulse born in distant storms and now reduced to this quiet, almost invisible breathing. From your place in the bow, looking down at the sea close alongside, you can see the surface as a moving mirror that never holds a single shape, its face constantly rearranging itself without ever becoming disordered. The color of the water is not one color, but many, a shifting palette of grays that change as the light changes and as the angle of your sight moves with the boat. Directly beneath the bow, where the shadow of the hull falls, the water is a deep slate, almost charcoal, a cool darkness that hints at the depths below. A few feet out, it lightens to a soft blue-gray, the color of wood smoke or a pigeon's wing, and further still, where the swell catches the diffuse glow from the cloud layer, it becomes a pale silver with a faint green undertone, like the inside of an oyster shell. The transitions between these colors are seamless, one shade bleeding into the next, and as the boat rises on a crest, the whole palette shifts slightly towards silver, while in the trough, it deepens again towards slate. The light that makes these colors possible comes from a sun that you cannot see, hidden as it is behind a high, thin overcast that covers the entire sky from horizon to horizon. The cloud layer is not a solid blanket, but a uniform veil, a milky white field that diffuses the sunlight into a soft, shadowless glow. There are no individual clouds, no edges, no darker patches promising rain. There is only this even, pearly brightness that seems to emanate from everywhere at once. The effect is to flatten the world, removing strong contrasts and leaving everything in a state of gentle illumination, as if the whole ocean were a painting lit by a window on an overcast day. Shadows on the boat are weak, barely there, and your own reflection in the water is a wavering shape without distinct edges. On the surface itself, the texture changes from moment to moment according to the touch of the air and the movement of the swells. Much of the time the sea is glassy, so smooth that it reflects the sky like a polished tabletop, and you can see the faint image of the cloud layer mirrored below you, a pale ghost of the sky that trembles with the boat's passage. When a puff of breeze touches down, which happens only occasionally and without pattern, The surface darkens into a patch of ripples that spreads outward in a rough circle, its edges fraying as it expands. The ripples catch the light differently, turning from silver to a darker grey, and then the breeze dies and the patch fades, the water returning to glass as if nothing had happened. These cat paws are the only interruptions in the otherwise unbroken smoothness, and they come so infrequently that each one is a small event in the long quiet of the morning. The swell itself has a rhythm that you have long since internalized, a period of perhaps 12 seconds from crest to crest, though you have never counted it. As each swell passes under the boat, the bow lifts and the horizon seems to sink. Then the bow descends and the horizon rises, a slow seesaw that never stops. In the trough, the view is confined to a small circle of water around the boat, the walls of the swells rising on either side to shoulder height. And you can see the texture of the sea up close, the tiny dimples and scratches on the surface that are the fingerprints of the wind. Then on the crest, the view opens out, and you can see for miles in every direction the ocean stretching away in a series of parallel ridges that fade into the haze. The transition between these two states is so gradual that you are never quite sure when you have moved from one to the other, only that the world has expanded or contracted by a small degree. The surface is not empty, though its contents are sparse and small. Tiny translucent organisms drift in the upper inches, some of them visible as faint specks of color when the light catches them just right. A pale blue here, a tinge of pink there, a glint of something that might be a miniature shell. They are part of the great invisible pasture of the sea, the drifting life that feeds the larger creatures, and you see them without focusing, your eyes registering their presence as a kind of faint graininess in the water. Occasionally a small Portuguese man-of-war floats past, its inflated sail a delicate blue-purple crest that catches the breeze and sends it skittering across the surface at a slight angle to the wind. The sail is ridged and translucent, no bigger than your hand, and underneath it trail the long, nearly invisible tentacles that drift behind like threads of glass. It passes the boat at a distance of 10 yards, then 20, then it is gone behind a swell, and the sea is empty again. Light moves on the water in patterns that are always changing and never repeating. When the surface is glassy, the reflection of the sky is a broad, diffuse sheet of white that shimmers slightly as the swell tilts it, creating a gentle flicker without sharp points of light. When the surface is rippled, the reflection breaks into 1,000 tiny facets, each one catching the light at a slightly different angle, and the result is a soft glitter that spreads across a patch of water and then fades. There is no sun path, no bright column of reflected sunlight, because the overcast prevents any direct beam from reaching the sea. Instead, the light is everywhere at once, a general brightness that seems to rise from the water as much as it falls from the sky. You can look at the sea without squinting, your eyes completely relaxed, and this adds to the general feeling of calm that pervades the morning. The color of the water changes not only with the angle of the light, but also with the depth, a thing you cannot see but can infer from the way the blue deepens in certain places and lightens in others. The ocean here is very deep, several thousand fathoms, and that depth is present in the saturation of the blue, a rich, dark tone that underlies the surface grays. In a few spots, where a submerged current wells up from below, the water takes on a slightly greener cast, a hint of emerald that suggests cooler temperatures and nutrients rising from the abyss. These patches are subtle, visible only when the boat passes directly over them, and they slide away astern with the same slow inevitability as everything else. The whale, feeds in such places, diving down to where the water is cold and dark and full of squid. But that is a thought for another part of your mind, not for the part that is watching the surface. The surface tension of the sea is a visible thing if you know how to look for it, a slight elastic skin that dimples around the boat's hull and resists the passage of small objects. When a drop falls from an oar blade, it lands on the surface and bounces a fraction before merging, creating a tiny crown of droplets that collapses inward on itself and disappears. The meniscus where the water meets the boat's planking is a thin, curved line that rises slightly up the wood, held there by the attraction between the water molecules and the cedar, and it trembles faintly as the boat moves. These are small things, almost invisible, but they are part of the endless detail of the sea's surface, a world in miniature that exists at the edge of your perception. The horizon, when you lift your eyes from the water close at hand, is a soft, blurred line that separates the sea from the sky without really distinguishing between them. The haze that obscures the islands also blurs the horizon, so that the two realms merge into a single pale band that runs all around the boat. You cannot tell exactly where the water ends and the sky begins. There is only a gradation from the darker grey of the near sea to the lighter grey of the distant sea, and then to the palest white of the cloud layer at its lowest edge. The effect is to make the world seem infinite and unbounded, a sphere of light and water that has no edges, and the boat a tiny point at its center. You are suspended in this sphere, and the slow movement of the boat does nothing to change the sense that you are in the middle of everything, motionless at the heart of a turning circle. The light itself has a quality that is hard to name, a kind of soft, silvery whiteness that seems to come from all directions equally. It is the light of a pearl, the light of the inside of a shell, the light of a foggy morning without the fog. It falls on your hands and on the harpoon shaft and on the gunwale without creating sharp shadows. Just a gentle modeling of forms, a slight rounding of surfaces that makes the world look like a very detailed drawing in pale ink. The temperature of the light is cool, not warm, though the air is warm. There is a bluish undertone that keeps the silvers and greys from feeling heavy, a lightness that lifts the eye and the spirit without demanding any response. As the morning progresses, you notice a very gradual change in the light, a subtle brightening that tells you the sun is climbing toward its noon position behind the cloud veil. The silvers become a little whiter, the slate a little bluer, and the shadows under the boat become a fraction deeper, though they are still only suggestions. This change is so slow that you cannot see it happening, only notice that what was true an hour ago is slightly less true now, a difference that has accumulated in tiny increments. The sea surface responds to this brightening by taking on a more metallic sheen, the broad areas between ripples now gleaming like pewter rather than dull lead, and the reflections of the cloud layer are brighter and more distinct. Occasionally a bird passes overhead, and you see its shadow on the water, before you see the bird itself, a dark cross moving across the swells with a smooth gliding motion. The frigate bird from earlier has returned or been replaced by another, and it hangs high up, almost invisible against the white sky, its long wings motionless as it rides a column of rising air. Its shadow on the sea is a small, dark shape that travels with it, slipping over the crests and down into the troughs, and it is the only thing on the surface that moves with any speed. You watch the shadow for a while, tracking its silent progress across the water, and then it tilts and fades as the bird moves away, leaving the sea empty of all but the swells. The water near the boat is so clear that you can see a short distance into it, perhaps 10 or 15 feet, before the blue deepens into opacity. In that clear upper layer, you can sometimes see a small school of fish, tiny silver bodies that flash as they turn in unison, a quick scattering of light that is gone before you can focus on it. They are drawn to the shadow of the boat, using it as shelter from the open water, and they stay with you for a while, a living escort that drifts alongside and then falls behind. You see them without remarking on them, a small detail in the larger fabric of the sea. The foam lines that form where currents converge are thin, irregular streaks on the surface, wider in some places and narrower in others, and they catch the light differently from the open water. Where a foam line passes, the surface is slightly agitated, the water there a paler grey, almost white, and small bubbles gather in clumps that persist for a surprisingly long time before popping one by one. The bubbles are very small, no bigger than pinheads, and they cluster together in rafts that drift with the current, their surfaces reflecting the sky in miniature. As the boat crosses a foam line, you hear a very faint change in the sound of the water at the bow, a slight increase in the hiss, and then the boat is through, and the sound returns to normal. The foam line stretches away to port and starboard, a long meandering curve that disappears into the haze. The surface of the sea, for all its stillness, is never perfectly flat. There is always some movement, some texture. Even on the calmer stretches there are tiny capillary waves, so small that they are almost invisible, that give the water a faint nap like the surface of velvet. These micro-ripples catch the light at a very low angle, creating a delicate shimmer that is not quite a glitter, more a soft sheen that moves with the swell. You can see them best when you look out to the side, across the water at a distance of 100 yards or so, where the perspective flattens the surface and the tiny ripples merge into a continuous satin glow. This glow is what the old waymen call the water sky, a brightness on the horizon that indicates open water, and it is a familiar companion on long days at sea. The temperature of the water, though you cannot feel it from the boat, is known to you by its color and by the feel of the air just above it. The sea here is warm, tropical, fed by the great equatorial current that flows from east to west, and that warmth rises from the surface in a faint invisible vapor that softens the air and gives it a slight weight. You can feel that weight on your skin, a gentle, humid pressure that is not uncomfortable, and it contributes to the overall sense of enclosure, as if the boat were wrapped in a blanket of warm, still air. The warmth of the water also affects the light, bending it slightly as it passes through the surface, creating a subtle lensing that makes objects below the water appear to shift and waver. From your position in the bow, you can lean slightly to one side and look straight down into the water along the boat's side, and there you can see the hull's reflection, a dark, wavering shape that moves with you. The reflection is distorted by the ripples, its lines broken and reassembled, its colors darker than the real hull, and it seems to be another boat, a shadow boat that keeps pace just below the surface. The shadow boat rises and falls with the swells, its mastless, sailless form a companion on the long approach, and you have spent many hours in other years watching this silent twin, a boat that never reaches its destination. Today you look at it for a moment, then lift your eyes back to the sea ahead. The light continues its slow evolution, the brightening now more noticeable as the sun reaches its zenith behind the clouds. The overcast has thinned slightly, or perhaps the sun is simply higher, and the quality of the light has shifted from pearl to a pale gold. Still diffuse but warmer, the water responds by taking on a faint yellowish cast in its silver tones, and the foam lines become brighter, almost white against the darker swells. The whole sea seems to glow from within, a soft, luminous field that stretches to the edges of the world, and the boat moves through it like a figure in a dream, silent, slow, and unhurried. You stand in the bow, your hand on the harpoon, your eyes on the water, and the surface of the sea tells you nothing and everything. It is a calm, empty page, and the morning writes its long, slow story upon it in characters of light and motion that require no reading. As the boat draws closer to the whale, the distance between you and the animal shrinks in increments so small that you cannot mark the moment when far becomes near. The whale is no longer a distant spout and a dark knob on the horizon. It is a presence that fills the forward view, a living landmass that alters the surface of the sea around it. But before the body breaks the water for its next breath, there is a shape beneath the surface, a shadow within the water, and it is this submerged form that now holds your attention. The whale is visible below the surface, in the same way that a deep cloud is visible through a thin layer of mist, a broad, dark mass that moves with a slowness that has no counterpart in the world above. The water here is clear enough in the upper fathoms to reveal the whale's outline before the animal rises, and you watch that outline with the quiet patience of someone who has learned to read the language of shadows. The shape first appears as a darkening of the blue-grey water, a place where the light seems to fall away rather than penetrate. It is not a hard shape, but a soft one, its edges blurred by the movement of the surface ripples and the refraction of the light as it passes from air to water. The darkness grows as the whale ascends, spreading outward and becoming more defined, until you can make out the blunt, squared front of the head, the long tapering curve of the body, and the faint ghostly suggestion of the flukes far below. The head of the sperm whale is its most distinctive feature, and under water it appears even more massive than it does at the surface. It is a block of living tissue, nearly rectangular when seen from the side, and it makes up perhaps a quarter of the animal's entire length. The front of the head is not pointed like a fish's, but blunt and nearly vertical, a wall of flesh and bone that pushes through the water with a pressure you can almost feel. Inside that head is the spermaceti organ, a vast reservoir of oil and wax that helps the whale regulate its buoyancy, and the thought of that hidden chamber, filled with clear liquid that cools and solidifies as the whale dives, is a quiet marvel that crosses your mind and then drifts away. The head is dark, a deep brown-grey that absorbs the light, and it is marked with faint, pale lines where the skin has creased or scarred over the years. behind the head, the body slopes down into a long ridged back that stretches away toward the tail, and this portion of the whale is thicker than any part of it, a round barrel of muscle and blubber that gives the animal its enormous girth. The skin over the back is wrinkled in places, not with the fine wrinkles of age, but with the deeper folds that allow the body to expand and contract with the pressures of the deep dives. These wrinkles are like the contours of a relief map, and when the whale shifts slightly, they catch the diffused light in long, sinuous curves that glint once and then darken. The color of the back is lighter than the head, a more brownish gray, and it is sprinkled with patches of white that are the scars of old encounters, some of them perfectly round, others ragged and stretched by the whale's growth. The narrow lower jaw, which you saw briefly at the surface, is invisible now, tucked up against the underside of the head, a long, pale shelf lined with teeth that fit into sockets in the upper gum. The jaw is not used for chewing. The whale swallows its prey whole, and the teeth are there for gripping and for the slow, mysterious battles that take place in the deep. From your angle above, looking down into the water, you cannot see the jaw, but you know where it is, and you know that when the whale turns you might catch a glimpse of its white gleam. The eye, set low and far back on the side of the head, is a small dark orb that does not seem to move or focus, though you know it sees you. The whale's vision is adapted to the dim light of the depths, and here near the surface it must be flooded with brightness, yet the eye does not blink or turn away. It simply watches, or appears to watch, with a calm that matches your own. The whale swims with a motion that is almost imperceptible, a gentle sculling of the tail that propels it forward without any visible effort. The great flukes, which span 16 feet from tip to tip, move up and down in long, slow arcs, their passage through the water creating subtle pressure waves that you cannot see but can imagine. The flukes are horizontal, not vertical like a fish's tail, and they are made of tough, fibrous tissue that is dark on the upper surface and lighter below. When the whale is near the surface, the flukes hang down deep, 30 or 40 feet below, and their motion is so slow that it seems to take a full minute for a single upward sweep to complete. The water around the flukes trembles faintly as they pass, a disturbance that rises to the surface as a soft circular ripple that spreads outward and vanishes. As the whale sounds deeper, the flukes rise and tilt, and for a moment they become the most visible part of the animal. Two great dark triangles that break the surface in reverse of their usual order. This is the moment you have seen many times. The head goes down, the back arches, and the flukes lift into the air, water streaming off their edges in smooth, glassy sheets. They rise with a slowness that seems to deny the whale's size, and at the apex of their lift they hang for a heartbeat, broad and still, before they slide down into the depths. The circle of calm water they leave behind is perfectly round, a smooth patch that looks like a window into a darker part of the sea, and you watch it until the swell breaks its edges and it fades. While the whale is submerged, the shape beneath the surface becomes a memory, something you hold in your mind's eye as the boat drifts. You know the whale is down there, somewhere ahead and below, moving through a world that is completely alien to you. The water column here is thousands of fathoms deep, and the whale can descend into the absolute darkness, where the temperature drops to just above freezing and the pressure is great enough to crush a wooden hull. You try to picture that descent, the light fading from blue to grey to black, the silence of the deep pressing in, but your imagination can only sketch it in vague terms. The whale, however, knows it completely, and it moves through those black waters with the same ease that you stand in the bow of the boat. The time that the whale stays below is filled with the small, quiet sounds of the boat at rest. The oars are shipped, the blades dripping slow, rhythmic drops that plink onto the surface and send out tiny rings. The men behind you breathe softly, and one of them shifts his weight with a creak of the thwart. The mate stands in the stern, his hand on the steering oar, his eyes scanning the water where the whale disappeared. The sea itself makes the same sounds it has made all morning. The low wash of the swells, the faint hiss of the bow wave as the boat drifts, the occasional slap of a small ripple against the planking. The islands are a little clearer now, their volcanic peaks soft but distinct, and the ship is a distant shape that has not moved. You wait, and the waiting is as calm as the rest of the morning. When the whale surfaces again, the shape beneath it returns, darkening the water before the spout breaks free. The ascent is so gradual that you cannot tell when it begins. The darkness simply grows, spreading upward from the depths, and then the blunt head resolves into a solid form, and the spout blooms with its soft, exhaling rush. The whale's body follows in the same slow unrolling you have watched all morning. The head, the back, the hump, the knuckles, and then the tail, which remains low, the flukes barely below the surface. The animal rides there, breathing, its immense shape half in and half out of the world, and you can see the way the water parts around its head, the thin bow wave curling along its sides, the slight depression in the surface where its bulk presses down. The skin of the whale, seen up close, is a landscape in itself. It is not smooth like a dolphin's, but textured, with the same tiny wrinkles and folds that you noticed from afar now revealed in greater detail. There are patches where the skin has been scarred by the suckers of giant squid, circles of pale white that stand out against the dark background, each one the size of a dinner plate or larger. There are long, straight scars from the teeth of other whales, and there are patches of lighter pigmentation that seem to be part of the whale's natural coloring, a mottling of browns and greys that is unique to this individual. The skin is covered with a thin film of something that glistens, perhaps oil from the whale's own body or a layer of microscopic life that clings to it. And this film catches the light in a faint rainbow sheen that shimmers as the whale moves. The whale's breathing has a rhythm that you have come to know by the intervals between spouts, a pattern that is now as familiar as your own heartbeat. The blowhole opens with a soft, muscular action, and the stale air rushes out in that bushy, forward-leaning column, the mist full of fine droplets that drift downwind and settle on the water. Then the blowhole closes, and the whale inhales, a deep, silent intake that you can only infer from the slight depression that appears around the blowhole ridge. The pause between breaths is long enough that you could fit several of your own breaths into it, and in that pause the whale seems to exist in a state of perfect suspension, a living island resting on the sea. The narrow lower jaw, pale and slender, becomes visible when the whale rolls slightly to one side, and you see the teeth for the first time, big conical pegs that curve backward and fit into deep sockets in the upper jaw. They are yellow-white, worn in places from use, and they seem too small for such an enormous animal, though you know that each one is as long as your hand. The jaw moves slightly as the whale breathes, a slow, idle motion that has no apparent purpose, and then it closes again, the teeth vanishing into their sockets with a precision that speaks of ancient design. The water around the whale is disturbed only by the animal's own movement, a subtle churning that creates small eddies and swirls on the surface. Where the head pushes through, the water parts in a smooth, clean curve, and the foam that results is a thin, white line that traces the outline of the skull and then trails away down the sides. The body, as it slides forward, leaves a slight wake that spreads outward in a gentle V, and this wake is the only sign that the whale is in motion. The flukes, when they are near the surface, create a deeper disturbance, a slow rolling turbulence that lifts the water in a hump and then lets it settle. None of these movements are dramatic, they are as quiet as the rest of the morning, a slow dance of mass and water that has no audience but you. You can feel the whale's presence as a subtle change in the air, a faint warmth that seems to emanate from its body and drift across the gap between you. The smell is stronger now, that oily, slightly sweet odor that you first noticed at a distance, and it is mixed with the salt of the sea and the clean, faintly iodine tang of the open ocean. The smell is not unpleasant. It is the smell of life, of a large animal breathing and resting, and it settles around you like a familiar blanket. The breeze, what little there is, shifts and carries the smell away for a moment, then shifts again and brings it back, a slow oscillation of scent that marks the closing of the distance. The shape beneath the whale is not only the animal itself, but also the shadow it casts on the depths below. As the whale moves, you can see that shadow on the seafloor that is not there, a dark, wavering mass that seems to sink beneath the visible body, a ghostly companion that mirrors every movement. The light from the overcast sky does not penetrate deeply, and the shadow fades into the blue at perhaps 100 feet, but in that upper region it is clear, a darker patch of water that moves in perfect synchrony with the whale. You watch the shadow as you watch the whale, your eyes shifting between the solid form and its immaterial twin, and you think about how the whale is never truly alone, always accompanied by this silent, sinking copy. The boat continues its slow drift, the oars dipping now and then to correct the heading, but mostly the men are resting and watching as you are. The mate has not spoken for a long while, and his silence is a part of the larger silence. The whale blows again, the spout a soft, misty column that hangs for a few seconds and then dissolves, and the animal's back rolls forward, the head dipping slightly, the hump rising. It is going to sound again, you can tell, and you watch the familiar sequence, the arch of the back, the slow rise of the flukes, the water streaming, the moment of suspension, and then the quiet slip downward into the green depths. The circle of calm water that remains is the only sign that the whale was ever there, a smooth, glassy patch that you watch until the swell reclaims it. During this new dive, the shape beneath the surface lingers in your mind, and you find yourself looking at the water with a changed attention, as if you can still see the whale down there somewhere, a dark comet moving through the blue. The sea, which seemed empty before, now seems full even in the whale's absence, and you know that when it returns it will rise with the same slow inevitability, the shape darkening the water again, the spout blooming, the great body surfacing with a quietness that is the very definition of calm. The boat drifts, the oars rest, and you stand in the bow with the harpoon still in its crotch, your eyes on the sea, waiting for the shape beneath to become a shape above, in its own time, at its own slow pace. The morning has been moving forward for what feels like a very long while, though exactly how long is not something you could say with any certainty. There are no clocks in the whaleboat, no bells to mark the half hours, no shifting of watches to divide the day into neat segments. Time out here is measured in other ways, in the slow accumulation of small changes that you notice only after they have already happened. The way a shadow has moved a few inches across a floor without anyone seeing it move. The sun, hidden behind the high overcast, has climbed past its highest point and is now beginning a descent so gradual that the light itself seems unchanged. Yet you know that the day has turned, because the quality of the warmth on your skin is different from what it was when the boat was first lowered. The warmth is the most constant companion of this long approach, a gentle, steady presence that wraps around you like a blanket that has been warmed by a fire that is now far away. It comes from above, where the sun presses its heat through the thin cloud layer, and from below, where the tropical sea radiates the stored warmth of countless calm days. The air temperature is not hot in the way of a scorching noon, but warm in the way of a comfortable room, a temperature that you could easily forget if you were not paying attention. Your bare forearms feel it as a faint weight, a soft pressure that is neither cool nor warm, but exactly neutral, the point where the body stops noticing and simply exists. Your shirt, a loose cotton garment faded to the color of old ivory, holds the warmth against your shoulders and back, and when a puff of breeze passes, the fabric lifts slightly and the air moves across your skin like a slow breath. Your feet, bare on the wooden platform of the bow, feel the warmth of the planks that have been absorbing the day's heat hour by hour. The cedar has a low thermal conductivity, so it does not become hot like metal would. It becomes warm like bread just out of the oven. A deep stored warmth that travels up through your soles and into your legs. You can feel the slight difference in temperature between the spots that have been in direct light and the spots that have been shaded by your own body, a subtle map of warmth that your feet read without your mind needing to interpret. The gunwale under your left hand is similarly warm, the wood holding the memory of the morning's light, and your palm rests on it with the same easy familiarity that it might rest on the arm of a favorite chair. The harpoon shaft under your right hand has also absorbed the warmth, the hickory now a few degrees above the air temperature, and it feels almost alive in your grip, as though the wood itself were generating heat. The iron at the top, by contrast, remains cool to the touch whenever your fingers brush against it, the metal refusing to hold the day's warmth. And this small contrast is a reminder of the different natures of the materials you hold. You shift your grip slightly, moving your palm to a new spot on the shaft that is fractionally cooler, and then that too warms under your touch, the heat of your hand transferring to the wood in a slow, invisible exchange. The oarsmen behind you feel the warmth as well, and their rhythm has slowed even further in response to the heaviness of the midday air. They pull with the same steady cadence as before, but the strokes are slightly longer, slightly lazier, the recovery a little more drawn out, as if the warmth has entered their muscles and made everything softer. You can hear the difference in the sound of the oars. The splash is a little quieter. the creak of the hole pins a little more drawn out, the drops from the blades falling with a more deliberate plink. One of the men exhales through his mouth, a long, low sigh that has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with the simple sensation of breathing warm air. No one speaks, and the silence that follows the sigh is deep and comfortable. The mate in the stern has seated himself on the stern sheets, his steering oar held loosely in one hand, and you can sense from the way the boat moves that he is making only the most minimal corrections. The whale is ahead somewhere, still below after its last dive, and the boat is simply drifting, waiting for the animal to surface again. The mate's posture, which you cannot see but can imagine, is one of relaxed attention. His shoulders dropped, his head tilted slightly to watch the water, his free hand resting on his knee. He has been doing this for many years, and his patience is as deep as the ocean beneath the boat, a calm that does not need to be maintained because it has become his natural state. The passage of time in this warm, quiet interval is something you feel rather than measure. You feel it in the slight tightening of the skin on your forearms, where the salt from the spray has dried and left a faint, powdery residue that tugs at the hairs when you move. You feel it in the growing thirst that you have not yet answered, a dry sensation at the back of your throat that is not urgent enough to make you reach for the water keg. You feel it in the slow, rhythmic blinking of your eyes, each blink a tiny separation from the world that lasts a fraction of a second and then returns you to the same scene. The glassy sea, the pale sky, the distant islands, the dark shape of the ship. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has changed, because time has moved forward and you have moved with it, minute by minute, breath by breath. The warmth of the day has brought with it a certain stillness in the air that is different from the stillness of the early morning. Then the air was cool and light, with a faint movement that stirred the surface of the sea into those occasional cat's paws. Now, the breeze has almost entirely died away, and the air is heavy and motionless, thick with the humidity that rises from the warm water. The surface of the sea is correspondingly calm, the glassy patches larger and more persistent, the ripples fewer and farther between. When a swell passes, the surface remains smooth, bending the reflections without breaking them, and the boat moves through it as through a very thin oil. The sounds of the sea are muffled by this calm, the hiss of the bow wave softer, the slap of the ripples against the planking almost absent. The smell of the ocean has changed too, altered by the warmth and the stillness. The salt is still there, that clean, mineral scent that is the baseline of all sea smells, but now it is mixed with a richer, more organic odor, the smell of living things in warm water. It is the smell of plankton blooming unseen in the upper layers, of small fish feeding, of the whale's distant spout that drifts across the surface and slowly disperses. There is a faint, sweet undertone to the air, a scent like dried seaweed or old wood, and it rises from the boat's own timbers as they warm in the sun. The tar in the seams between the planks gives off a soft, pungent note, not strong, just a hint, and the hemp of the line in its tub has its own dry, earthy fragrance that has been there all along but is now more noticeable in the still air. The light, too, has shifted with the hour. The high overcast that has covered the sky all morning has thinned a little more, and the sun, though still invisible, is now a more defined presence above the cloud veil. The light is a paler gold than before, a shade that speaks of afternoon rather than morning, and it falls on the water with a slightly more directional quality. Where earlier the illumination seemed to come from everywhere at once, now there is a faint sense that the light is coming from one side of the sky, the western side, and the shadows, though still weak, have a slight lean to them. The shadow of the boat on the water is a little longer, a little darker, and the reflections on the sea are a little more pronounced, the silver patches now showing a hint of yellow in their gleam. You feel this change in the light as a subtle shift in the mood of the day, though mood is too strong a word for something so gentle. It is more a sense that the morning has been spent and the afternoon has arrived, bringing with it the same calm, but a slightly different character. The morning was a time of beginning, of the boat being lowered and the first distant sighting of the spout. The afternoon is a time of continuation, of the long, slow approach, of the whale diving and surfacing, of the warmth settling in and the minutes stretching out. Nothing is urgent and nothing has been urgent, but now even the memory of urgency has faded, and you are left with only the present moment, which is warm and quiet and still. The islands on the horizon are now clearer than they have been all day, the haze having thinned along with the overcast. You can see the individual cones of the volcanoes, the dark ribbed slopes of old lava flows, the patches of green that mark the wetter, higher elevations. The islands are a deep blue-grey in the distance, their outlines sharpened by the afternoon light, and they seem closer than they are, the clear air bringing them forward in a way that the morning's haze did not. You know they are still many miles away, too far for any detail to be seen with the naked eye, but you can imagine the black rocks at their bases, the white line of surf where the swells break, the sea lions and the iguanas and the birds that make their homes there. It is a quiet image, a picture of a place that exists without you, and you hold it in your mind for a moment before returning your attention to the sea ahead. The warmth of the afternoon has made you aware of your own body in a way that the cooler morning did not. You are not uncomfortable, but you are conscious of the places where your clothing touches your skin, the waistband of your trousers, the collar of your shirt, the slight dampness under your arms and along your spine. The dampness is not sweat so much as humidity, the moisture in the air condensing on your skin and staying there, a thin, invisible layer that cools you very slightly whenever the air moves. Your mouth is dry and you consider reaching for the water keg, but the thirst is still only a suggestion, and you let it be. The man behind you takes another drink, and you hear the hollow sound of the water in the keg, the glug-glug of it pouring, the soft thud of the cork. The sound is pleasant, a reminder that water exists and is close, and you take a small comfort from it even though you do not drink yourself. The oarsmen have stopped rowing now, the mate having given the soft command to rest, and the boat drifts on the swell with no forward propulsion. The oars are shipped, the blades resting just above the water, and the men are sitting quietly on their thwarts, their heads bowed or their faces turned toward the distant islands. One of them is trailing his hand in the water, his fingers making a soft, trickling sound that is barely audible. Another is retying the leather grommet on his oar, his movements slow and careful, the thong pulled tight and knotted with a series of small, precise motions. No one speaks, and the silence stretches out like the afternoon itself, a long, warm, comfortable pause in the middle of everything. The warmth has a way of making time feel thicker, slower, as if the minutes themselves are moving through warm oil rather than cold air. You have no way to measure this, but you sense it in the way your thoughts move, drifting from one thing to another without any hurry, settling on a detail of the sea or the boat and then moving on. You might think about the ship for a while, picturing the quiet activity on deck, the men mending sails or splicing rope, the cook preparing the afternoon meal, the captain writing in his log. You might think about the coolness below decks, the dim light of the forecastle, the smell of the wood and the oil in the men, a smell that is as familiar as your own skin. You might think about the last time you stood in this bow on a different day with a different whale and how the approach was the same silence, the same patience, the same slow closing of distance. These thoughts come and go, leaving no residue, just the quiet contentment of a mind that is free to wander. The whale has been below for a long dive now, and the water where it disappeared has long since smoothed over, leaving no sign. You have been watching the surface with a diffuse attention, not searching, just waiting, and the wait has become a part of the warmth and the stillness. The sea is very calm now, the swells so low and slow that the boat barely rocks, and the horizon is a perfect unbroken circle of soft grey blue. The sky above is a paler version of the same colour, the thin clouds now almost white, and the sun behind them is a bright patch that you can locate by the faint lensing of the light. It is a moment of perfect equilibrium, a balance of light and warmth and quiet that asks for nothing and gives nothing but itself. In this moment, you become aware of a faint humming sound, a low, steady vibration that seems to come from the boat itself. It is the sound of the warmth in the wood, the planks expanding slightly as they absorb the day's heat, the fibers stretching and settling against one another. The sound is so low that it is almost below the range of hearing, more a feeling in the soles of your feet than a noise in your ears, and it has been there all along, unnoticed. You listen to it now, this tiny song of the boat's slow aging, and it blends with the other small sounds of the afternoon, the drip of water from the oar blades, the creak of the thole pins as the boat rocks, the distant, soft wash of a swell breaking against the ship's hull, far away. The time continues to pass, and you continue to stand in the bow, your hand on the harpoon, your eyes on the sea. The warmth sits on your shoulders like a hand, and the stillness wraps around you like a second skin. The afternoon has no edges, no beginning and no end, only a long, slow middle that stretches from the morning to the evening, without any breaks. You are in the middle of that middle, suspended in the warmth and the quiet, and there is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. The whale will surface when it surfaces, and the boat will move when it moves, and until then, you wait, and the waiting is as warm and calm as the day itself. The gap between the boat and the whale has now shrunk to a distance that can be measured not in miles or in cable lengths, but in boat lengths. Perhaps 3 or 4 of these slim cedar hulls laid end to end, a space that the eye can cross in a single glance. The whale is no longer a distant shape or a shadow beneath the surface. It is a living, breathing body so near that you can see the individual scars on its broad back, each one a pale line or circle that stands out against the dark skin like the tracks of slow rain on a window pane. Some of these scars are old and smooth, their edges worn down by years of swimming, while others are fresher, a brighter white against the deep brown grey, and together they form a map of the whale's history that is written on its skin. You read this map without thinking, your eyes moving across the surface of the animal as it rides the swell, and each scar is a small story that you will never know. The patches of white around the whale's mouth are visible now too, a regular border of pale skin that frames the dark head and extends back toward the eye, giving the animal a distinct, almost individual appearance. The lower jaw, narrow and long, is tucked up against the underside of the head, and you can see the line where the white of the jaw meets the dark of the body, a clean division that is softened by the water that streams along it. The eye, set low and far back, is a dark, glistening orb that seems to hold no expression you can read, yet you feel its awareness as a quiet pressure, a presence that is as calm as your own. The eye does not look at you directly, but it knows you are there, and the whale's slow, steady breathing suggests that it has accepted the boat's nearness without alarm. The blowhole ridge, that raised, muscular structure set far forward on the left side of the head, swells slightly with each breath the whale takes, a rhythmic, almost hypnotic movement that draws your attention again and again. The ridge is a slightly lighter grey than the surrounding skin, and the blowhole itself is a dark slit that opens and closes with a soft, precise action, like the valve of a great bellows. You watch the sequence. First the slit parts, then the stale air rushes out in that bushy, forward-angled spout, the mist full of fine droplets that catch the light. Then the slit closes and the ridge relaxes, sinking back into the curve of the head. Then the long pause before the next exhalation, a pause filled by the low sound of the water moving past the whale's sides. The rhythm of this breathing is slower than your own, each cycle taking perhaps 20 or 30 of your heartbeats, and without meaning to, you begin to match your breathing to it, your inhales and exhales stretching out, until they fall into the same slow, oceanic tempo. The boat is approaching from the side and slightly behind, a path that will intercept the whale's slow drift without cutting directly across its bow or coming up from directly astern, either of which might startle it. This path was chosen by the officer in the stern through a series of quiet hand signals, gestures so small and economical that they barely disturbed the air. You did not see these signals with your eyes, but you felt them through the boat's movement, the slight adjustments in heading that the mate imparted to the steering oar, each one bringing the bow a few degrees to starboard or a fraction to port. The approach is now so finely tuned that the boat seems to be drawn toward the whale by some invisible thread, pulled along a curve that is both mathematically precise and utterly natural, a line that flows from the boat's stem to the whale's flank without a single waver. The narrowing of the gap has changed the quality of the silence in the boat. Before, when the whale was farther away, the silence was broad and open, a quiet landscape that stretched in all directions. Now, as the distance closes, the silence becomes more focused, more concentrated, as if the space between you and the whale has become a lens that magnifies every small sound. The creak of the hole pins seems sharper, the drip of water from the oar blades more distinct, the low hiss of the bow wave more intimate. The breathing of the oarsman has become so soft it is almost inaudible, each man holding himself still in his place, and the only sound from the stern is the faint, rhythmic whisper of the steering oar as the mate makes his tiny corrections. The boat itself seems to be holding its breath along with you. Your own stillness, as the gap shrinks, has deepened into something that feels almost like a different state of being. You are no longer a man standing in a boat holding a harpoon. You are a point of absolute quiet, within a larger quiet, a figure so motionless that you might be carved from the same wood as the stem you brace against. Your left hand on the gunwale has become a fixed clamp, the fingers curl just so, the pressure exactly what is needed and no more, and you've lost all sense of the boundary between your skin and the smooth, warm cedar. Your right hand on the harpoon shaft has tightened its grip by only the smallest fraction, a change in pressure that is no more than a slight firming of the fingers, yet you feel it as a new alertness, a focusing of attention that travels from your palm up through your arm and into your chest. Your breathing has slowed to match the whale's rhythm. One deep inhale as the blowhole opens, one long sigh as the spout rises and fades, and then a waiting silence that stretches between breaths like the trough between swells. Your body has become a part of the boat's balance in a way that goes beyond the simple physics of weight and trim. You are the counterweight to the steering oar, the human element that completes the geometry of the approach. If you were to shift your foot by an inch, the bow would dip and the boat would wobble, and the mate would have to correct and the whale might notice. So you do not shift. Your knees remain soft, absorbing the gentle rise and fall of the swell, but the rest of you is as still as the harpoon in its crotch, as still as the loggerhead waiting for the line, as still as the sea when the breeze has entirely died away. The stillness is not a strain. It is a release, a letting go of the small constant movements that fill a normal day, until what remains is only the essential presence of a man who has become a part of the boat. The whale's body, seen from so close, reveals details that the distance had hidden. The skin is not uniformly smooth but textured with tiny, irregular bumps and ridges, like the surface of an old piece of leather that has been polished by use. There are small, pale barnacles clinging to the leading edge of the flippers and to the tip of the lower jaw, their shells sharp and white against the dark skin, and a few long trailing strands of seaweed, brown and tattered, that have attached themselves to the whale's back and now stream in the water like forgotten ribbons. The blowhole ridge, each time it opens, reveals the dark interior of the nasal passage, a deep, wet opening that contracts again with a soft, muscular precision that you can see but not hear. The mist from the spout drifts downwind, and now it reaches you as a very fine spray, a faint, warm dampness on your cheeks and forehead, the exhalation of a creature whose lungs are larger than your entire body. The sounds the whale makes are clearer now as well. The spout itself is a soft, rushing puff, a sound like a giant sigh that might be tinged with the faintest overtone of a whistle, though it is so deep and low that it is more felt than heard. Between spouts, you can detect a low, resonant hum, an almost subaudible vibration that travels through the water and up through the planks of the boat. A sound that is not exactly a vocalization but something more fundamental, the thrum of the great heart beating somewhere inside that massive chest. The rumble of air moving through passages the size of tree trunks. You feel this hum in the soles of your feet and in the hand that rests on the gunwale, a steady, deep bass note that is the whale's own background music, its song of existence. The officer in the stern has raised his hand once more, a small gesture that the stroke oar interprets immediately, and the oars have stopped. The boat is now coasting on its own momentum, a momentum so small that the bow wave has faded to a thin, silent ripple, and the only forward movement comes from the slow drift of the current and the gentle push of the swell. The mate's hand signals are the only communication, a language of fluttered fingers and slight inclinations of the head that you understand without needing to look back, because each signal produces a tiny shift in the boat's attitude that you feel in your feet. When his hand drops, the boat slows. When it rises, the oars dip for a single silent stroke. When it moves to the side, the steering oar bends and the bow swings a fraction of a degree. It is a conversation conducted in complete silence, a dialogue between the mate, the oarsman, and the sea, and you are the silent listener at its very front. As the gap continues to close, the whale's flank fills more and more of your forward view, a dark, curving wall of flesh that rises and falls with the swell, its surface glistening with a thin film of moisture that reflects the pale sky in a distorted, wavering image. You can see the individual muscle movements under the skin, the slow, rippling contractions that propel the animal forward with such deceptive ease, each one starting near the head and traveling down the length of the body in a wave that disappears into the flukes. The whale is not swimming actively now. It is simply resting at the surface, allowing the swells to pass under it, its breathing steady, its movements minimal. It is as calm as you are, a great, quiet presence that seems almost asleep, though you know that a part of its brain is always awake, always aware, always monitoring the ocean around it. Your own awareness has narrowed to a small circle that includes only the whale, the boat, and the few feet of water that separate them. The ship is irrelevant now, a distant shape on the horizon that has no part in this moment. The islands are irrelevant now, their volcanic peaks faded into the afternoon haze. Even the oarsmen behind you have become a kind of abstraction, a supportive presence that you trust without thinking about. The only things that exist are the harpoon in your hand, the iron resting in its crotch, the bow of the boat approaching the whale's side, and the slow, repeating rhythm of the blowhole opening and closing, opening and closing. You've become a figure of absolute stillness, a man-shaped piece of the bow itself, and the weighting that holds you is so deep it feels like a kind of sleep, a waking sleep that is more restful than any bed. Your breathing, now fully synchronized with the whale's, has become a single, slow cycle that you share with the animal. You inhale as the blowhole opens, drawing the warm, salt-scented air deep into your lungs, and you hold it as the spout rises and fades, feeling the oxygen spread through your body. Then you exhale, a long, controlled sigh that escapes through your lips with no more sound than the whale's own spout, and you pause, empty and still, until the blowhole opens again. This shared rhythm creates a connection that is not mystical but deeply physical, a matching of two respiratory systems across the narrow gap of the ocean, and it holds you in a state of calm that is beyond anything you have felt on land. You are not excited, you are not afraid, you are not even particularly alert. You are simply present, fully and completely present, in a moment that has no beginning and no end. The harpoon in your hand has become an extension of that presence. You feel the weight of the iron at the top, the smoothness of the hickory shaft in your palm, the faint vibration of the boat's movement transmitted through the wood, but you do not think about what the harpoon will do. The strike is a possibility that lies somewhere ahead, in a future that has not yet arrived, and in this moment of pure waiting, the strike does not matter. What matters is the stillness, the approach, the slow closing of the gap, the quiet magnificence of the whale's body so close you could almost reach out and touch it. The ime remains in its crotch, the line remains coiled, the loggerhead remains idle, and you remain motionless, a part of the boat's own quiet architecture. The gap is now so small that you can see the tiny details of the whale's skin in the way you might examine the grain of a piece of driftwood. There are small circular scars from the suckers of squid, each one a slightly raised ring of scar tissue with a depressed center, and they are scattered across the whale's head and back in no pattern you can discern. There are long, straight cuts from the teeth of other whales, healed over but still visible as pale channels in the dark surface. There are patches of rough, barnacle-encrusted skin, and patches where the skin is as smooth as a polished stone. The whale's body is a living record of its life in the deep, a tactile history that you are privileged to observe from this impossibly close distance. The mate's hand rises once more, and the boat makes its final tiny adjustment, the bow edging slightly to starboard, so that you will come alongside the whale just behind the hump, where the body is thickest and the iron will hold best. You feel this adjustment as a slight pressure on the soles of your feet, a minute change in the angle of the planks, and you adjust your own balance by a hair's width to compensate, your knees bending a millimeter more, your back straightening by a fraction. Then you are still again, even stiller than before, a stillness that has been refined to its essence, all unnecessary motion eliminated, all thought quieted. You are waiting, and the whale is waiting, and the sea is waiting, and the whole world has contracted to this single, suspended moment that unrolls as slowly as the swell passing under the hull. The blowhole opens again. The spout rushes out, and you feel the warm mist on your face, a gentle damp caress that carries the faint oily scent you have come to know. The spout fades, the blowhole closes, and the whale holds its breath for another long pause. You hold yours too, and in the silence that follows, you can hear, very faintly, the low, resonant sound of the whale's interior, the hum of its massive heart, the rush of its blood, the quiet, self-contained noise of a living world. You stand in the bow, motionless, and the gap between you and the whale shrinks to nothing. A distance so small that it is no longer a distance but a threshold, a line that has not yet been crossed, but that will be crossed in its own time, in its own slow, inevitable way. The boat is now within a single length of the whale's glistening side, a distance so small that the animal's body seems to fill not just your forward view, but the entire world. A dark, curving horizon of living flesh that rises and falls with the long Pacific swell. The whale's flank, seen from this final vantage, is a landscape of subtle textures and shifting colors, the deep brown-gray of the skin overlaid with the silver sheen of the water that streams along it in thin, continuous sheets, each one catching the soft afternoon light and then releasing it. The skin glistens with a moisture that is not quite water and not quite oil, a fine, slick film that makes the surface shine like old leather that has been polished by years of handling. Individual scars, the circular sucker marks and the long tooth lines and the patches of rough barnacle growth, all stand out in heightened detail, each one a small story etched into the whale's hide, and you are near enough to read them as if they were lines on a page, though you do not try. The warmth of the animal reaches you across the gap, a gentle, steady radiation that is different from the warmth of the sun or the warmth of the boat's planks. It is a body heat that carries with it the deep, slow metabolism of a creature that lives in the cold depths and has brought that inner fire to the surface. It touches your face and your bare forearms as a faint, almost imperceptible pressure, a sensation that is more a presence than a temperature, and it brings with it the smell you have been aware of for some time. That oily, slightly sweet scent that is now stronger and more complex, with undertones of the deep sea and the squid the whale has consumed in the darkness far below. The mist of the spout, when it comes, is a warm, damp veil that settles on your skin and evaporates almost instantly, leaving behind the faintest trace of salt and a fleeting coolness that is gone before you can notice it properly. The harpoon is raised now, lifted from its crotch in a motion so gradual and so quiet that it seemed to happen without your willing it, the shaft sliding upward through your grip, until the iron clears the gunwale and points outward over the water. Your right hand holds the hickory shaft about a third of the way down from the iron, the wood fitting into the channel of your palm that has been shaped by years of this very grip, and your fingers are curled around it with a firmness that is neither tight nor loose, but exactly what is required to hold the weight steady. The iron points outward and down at an angle that you know by feel alone, an angle that has been calculated not by mathematics but by muscle memory, the long, dark blade aligned with the curve of the whale's back in a way that will permit a clean, deep entry if the moment ever arrives. The barb on the iron catches the light for a second, a small, sharp glint against the pale sky, and then the light shifts and the barb is dark again. Your left hand has left the gunwale and now rests lightly on the boat's stem, the curved oak post that rises from the keel at the very front of the bow, and this new position gives you an added stability that you do not need, but that your body has sought out anyway. The stem is cool and rough under your fingers, its surface not smooth by handling like the gunwale, but textured with the tool marks of the shipwright who shaped it long ago, and your touch on it is a grounding connection, an anchor that holds you to the boat as the boat holds you to the sea. Your feet remain in their familiar positions, one slightly ahead of the other, your knees soft, your weight balanced, and your whole body from the soles of your feet to the crown of your head has become a single, integrated instrument of stillness, a human tripod that moves with the boat as if you were built into its structure. The oars behind you have been still for some time, their blades shipped and dripping, the men on the thwarts holding their breath along with you. You did not hear the command that stilled them. Perhaps the mate made no sound at all, only a gesture that the stroke oar understood, and now the boat drifts forward on the faint momentum that remains, a momentum so small that it is almost not movement at all, but a kind of slow, inevitable settling, like a leaf falling onto the surface of a pond. The bow wave has vanished entirely, and the water ahead of the stem is as smooth as glass until the whale's own movements disturb it. The subtle push of the animal's body creating a gentle circular ripple that spreads outward and laps against the boat's planking with a sound so faint it is like a whisper heard through a closed door. The whale's breathing has not changed. It remains the same slow, steady rhythm that you matched your own breathing to many minutes ago. A cycle of spout and pause that is the heartbeat of this long, quiet approach. The blowhole ridge swells. The dark slit parts. The bushy column of mist rushes out and forward, hanging for its brief glistening moment before dissolving into the warm air. And then the pause returns, a stillness within a stillness. An interval that is filled only with the low hum of the whale's interior life and the far-off wash of the sea against the distant islands. You breathe when the whale breathes, a shared cadence that binds you together across the narrowing gap, and in the pauses between you are as still as the animal itself, a pair of living beings suspended in the same calm moment. The boat has drifted now to a position just behind the whale's hump, that slight rise in the back where the body is thickest and the blubber is deepest, and this is the place the mate has guided you toward with his silent hand signals, the place where the iron will find the best hold. The whale side, seen from this close, is a gentle convex curve that slopes away from you both upward toward the ridged spine and downward toward the dark water, and the skin of the waterline is marked by a subtle change in color, a darker band where the sea has stained it over the years. The flipper, a long narrow paddle of dark flesh, hangs down into the water on the near side, its leading edge rough with barnacles, its trailing edge smooth and streamlined, and it moves very slightly as the whale sculls, a gentle absent motion that keeps the animal's position steady against the current. The gap between the iron and the whale's side is now no more than a few feet, a distance that you could span with your arm if you were to lean forward. Though you do not lean, you do not move at all. The iron hovers in the air, the point dark and sharp and aimed at a spot on the whale's flank that you have selected without conscious thought, a spot just behind the hump where the scars are few and the skin is smooth, a place that has been waiting for this moment since the boat was lowered. The line that is attached to the iron trails back through the notch in the bow, around the loggerhead, and into the tub where it lies in its careful coils, and it is ready to run if the iron enters and the whale dives, but it has not yet been called upon. It rests, as you rest, in a state of pure potential. The mate in the stern has raised his hand one final time, a gesture that you feel as a slight tension in the boat's atmosphere rather than see with your eyes, and that gesture means that the approach is complete. The boat is in position, and everything now depends on the stillness and the timing and the calm that has been cultivated all through this long morning and afternoon. You do not need to look back to know that his hand is raised. You can feel it in the way the oarsmen hold themselves, in the absolute silence that has descended over the boat, in the quality of the air itself, which seems to have thickened and slowed. No one breathes loudly. No one shifts his weight. No one does anything but wait. The whale, for its part, shows no sign of alarm or awareness that might alter the situation. Its breathing continues in that same slow rhythm. Its body rides the swell with the same easy grace. Its eye remains dark and calm and unfocused on the boat. It is possible that the whale does not see you, that your presence is outside its field of view, or it is possible that it sees you perfectly well and has simply decided that you are not a threat, a small wooden thing floating on the surface of its world with no more significance than a piece of driftwood. Either way, the whale remains as it has been throughout the approach, a calm, quiet presence that asks for nothing but the right to breathe and rest and exist in the vast quiet of the Pacific. In this suspended moment, the world has contracted to a very small circle that contains only the boat and the whale and the sea that holds them both. The ship, anchored somewhere behind you, has faded from your awareness entirely, its masts and hull and crew reduced to a memory that has no bearing on the present. The islands on the horizon, those dark volcanic shapes that have watched over the morning, have also faded, their outlines dissolving into the afternoon haze, as if they were never there. The sky, the pale overcast sky that has diffused the light all day, is now just a soft white dome overhead, a ceiling that holds the warmth close and muffles the sounds of the world. And the sea, The long rolling sea that has been your companion since the boat was lowered has become not a separate thing, but a medium in which you and the whale and the boat are all suspended, a fluid silence that supports you as gently as a hand. The iron trembles slightly, not with any movement of your hand, but with the faint vibration that travels up through the boat from the water. The hum of the whale's heart and the pulse of the swell and the tiny microscopic movements of the boat's timbers as they expand in the warmth. You feel this tremor as a live thing in the wood, a small continuous quiver that is the opposite of stillness and yet is indistinguishable from it, a reminder that even in the deepest quiet there is always some motion, some life, some invisible energy that will not be stilled. The barb of the iron catches the light again for a second, that sharp, quick glint against the grey-white sky, and then the light shifts once more and the iron is dark, the point aimed and steady and waiting. The sound that fills this infinite moment is the sound of the whale's breathing, which is now the loudest thing in your world. A soft, rushing exhalation that breaks the silence and then leaves it deeper than before. Between spouts, you can hear the almost inaudible trickle of water along the whale's sides, the faint liquid sound of the sea passing around the great body and rejoining behind it, a sound that is like a small stream running over smooth stones. Behind you, in the boat, there is no sound at all, no creak of thole pins, no drip of water from oar blades, no rustle of clothing or whisper of breath. The men have become as still as you are, statues in a floating gallery, and their silence is a gift that they give to the moment without being asked. Your own heart beats on, a steady, slow pulse that you can feel in your temples and in the tips of your fingers where they touch the harpoon shaft, and it is beating at the pace of the whale's own heart, a deep, measured rhythm that is the tempo of this entire day. You are not excited and your pulse does not quicken. You are not afraid and your breath does not shorten. You are not impatient, and your thoughts do not race ahead to what might happen next. You are simply here in the bow of a whaleboat holding a harpoon within touching distance of a living sperm whale, and the moment is complete in itself, a whole world that asks for nothing more than to be inhabited. The mate's hand, you sense, has dropped, a small final signal that means the boat is as close as it needs to be, and the next movement, if there is one, will be yours. But that movement does not come. You hold the harpoon poised, the iron pointing outward and down at its memorized angle, and you wait. The whale breathes again, the spout rising and falling, the mist touching your face with its warm, fleeting dampness, and you breathe with it, a slow inhale and an even slower exhale that leaves you empty and calm. The boat rises on a swell, the bow lifting a few inches and then settling, and the iron moves with you, its point steady, its weight constant in your hand. The sea stretches away on all sides, pale silver and soft slate, and the light continues its slow, imperceptible descent toward evening, though the afternoon is still long and the day is far from over. In this infinite moment before the strike itself becomes an abstraction, a theoretical event that may or may not occur, a possibility that hovers in the future, like a cloud on the horizon. It does not matter whether you throw the iron or let it rest. The important thing has already been done, which is to bring the boat to this place, to this calm, to this perfect alignment of whale and sea and human patience. The iron remains poised, the air remains soft, and the boat drifts weightless on the cusp of an action that never needs to arrive. The whale's body, dark and glistening, fills the view ahead, its breathing steady, its presence as constant as the sea itself. You stand in the bow, a figure of absolute stillness, and the world holds its breath along with you. The line in its tub lies waiting, the coils dark and glistening with seawater, the chain a matte grey curve across the top, and it will lie there until it is needed, which may be in a moment, or in an hour, or never. The loggerhead stands idle, its worn groove a record of past encounters, its lanyard slack, its post cool and smooth. The spare harpoon rests in its box, wrapped in canvas, the iron sharp and greased and patient. The oarsmen wait on their thwarts, their hands still, their breathing shallow, and the mate in the stern holds the steering oar with a light touch, his eyes on the whale, his presence a calm, guiding force that has brought the boat to this point and will guide it away again when the time comes, whatever that time may be. The whale blows once more, the spout a soft, white brush stroke against the pale sky, and the sound of it is the only sound in the world outside your own slow heartbeat. The mist drifts downwind, carrying that warm, oily scent, and it settles on the sea in a faint, iridescent film that spreads and fades. The blowhole closes, the ridge relaxes, and the pause returns, that long, suspended pause that is the heart of the moment. You hold your breath along with the whale, and the stillness is so deep that you can feel the rotation of the earth, the slow, grand movement of the planet turning beneath the boat, carrying you and the whale and the sea eastward into the coming night. But the night is far away, and the afternoon is still calm and bright, and there is no need to think about what comes next. The iron remains poised, the gap remains unclosed, and the story holds here, in this long, quiet, unbroken moment. The harpoon does not move, the whale does not flee, the boat does not rock. The sea stretches on and on, a field of gentle swells that have travelled halfway across the ocean to lift this boat on this afternoon, and the sky arches over it all, a pale, silent dome that asks no questions and gives no answers. You stand in the bow, a part of the boat and a part of the sea, and a part of the moment. And the waiting is so complete that it has become a kind of peace. A peace that has no beginning and no end, stretching out before you and behind you like the horizon itself. And so the boat drifts, the iron poised, the whale breathing, the sea calm, in an infinite moment that never needs to be broken, as the afternoon light softens toward evening and the world settles deeper into its quiet, endless patience.